The sound of trumpets, also known as Clangor Buccinae. In the name of the Lord. Amen. The sound of a trumpets comes from the blessed philosophical stone which thunders here wonderfully with the generation and growth and strength, from which the philosophers have set many and various sayings and writings. The first philosopher Thales Milesius says of the prima materia, the oldest of the entium, God is eternal, unbegotten. Therefore Pythagoras also says, I say that God was above all things, nothing was with him since he existed. And understand that God, being alone in the beginning, created a substance that we call the prima materia. And out of the same substance he created four other things, the earth, the air, the water and the earth, out of which he created everything, both high and low. And so, above all, without the materia prima, he created four elements from which he subsequently created what he wanted, namely many natures. Therefore, God created with his word, to which he said, Be like that, they have become, namely the four elements and others. Therefore, out of the same four elements, all things are created, out of a root, the sky, the thrones, the angels, the stars, the sun, the sea, and everything that is in the sea, which are diverse and not regardless of which natures God has made diverse like the creations, because they are out various elements are created. Then when they are created from one element they have different and equal natures, because these various elements lose their natures when they are mixed, because the warm mixed with the cold becomes neither warm nor cold, but the wet mixed with the dry becomes neither dry nor damp. That's why the creatures that come out of it have different natures. Of which natures he created several out of one element, and his angels which he alone created out of the light and out of two elements, namely out of the light and air. These three were created, namely the sun, moon and stars. Therefore the angels alone are brighter than the moon and stars, because they are created by a special one, which is the fourth rare one. The sun and the moon and stars are created from the fire and air composition, but the souls, as the philosophers say, which are poured into the bodies today and thereafter daily, are made by new ones, are not created in the mother's womb, but are created only from the gift from the first beginning of the universe, and are loved in the mind and strength of the Creator until the appointed time when they are to be poured into the new body than in the previous one, materia, and such through the medium which is spirit. And do not deviate from the body where the spirit first deviated and became nothing. When this deviated and became naught, the soul also deviates, although the theologians say that the soul is poured into the body and created in the egg pouring. And God amuses himself by begetting and creating new souls every day and things like that outside of the prima materia. Again, God created the sky out of water and air. The sky is also made up of two elements, one of the thin ones, namely the air, and the other thick ones, namely the water. And out of three elements God created the flying ones, the wild animals and growing. Therefore the flying ones are created out of the air and water, because the flying ones and also that have a spirit in the growing ones are created out of the air, water and earth. But there is nothing that grows faster than the fire's materia in the growing ones, is just that the element of the fire is hidden in the air, but the thick fire is not in anyone who has a spirit and a soul. But out of the four elements, our father Adam and his sons were created out of the water and at the same time out of the earth. And everything that God has created from a material that does not die on the day of judgment, then the description of death is a separation of the composite, but what is not put together cannot be separated, and therefore there is no separation of death and death souls from the body. But each one that is put together apart from two or three must be separated from each other, which is the property of death. And know that no compound that lacks the fire eats or drinks nor sleeps, and even though the angels are created from the fire, why don't they eat? Because it is said that the fire is an element that eats and consumes. The answer will be that the bad fire does not consume anything but the thick one. Then the angels are not from the thickest fire but from the least of the mild and bad fire, because they were created from the least of the fire, so they do not slack. Note that the four first qualities or forms are namely the dryness, the cold, the warm and the moisture, and they are called the primary qualities. Then from them all the elements are put together and are all elementated and complexed, and are the elementa of the bad qualities. That is why they have the power to transform from one quality to another, sometimes dry, wet, sometimes warm, and sometimes cold, after the division of nature is strengthened by the complexion of its elements or weakened, and the qualities are like the material of the elements in which they place their forms and bring them to be also held in them, as his nature proves in every generation. An element alone cannot be corrupted or created in it itself, then there is not a sufficient nature, and therefore you must be more. Of the same nature is a subtle substance into which the qualities of the elements enter. That is why the same qualities of the elements draw to themselves from the sea in which they have superfluous power. And so the qualities are like the material of the elements into which they bring their forms and are held in them as their nature shows in every generation, and in the subtle substance they are made fat in every generation. And in a subtle substance the qualities of the elements condense and thicken. And if the same nature were not of the subtle substance and essentiality of the elements, then the impure essence of the elements could not exist and prevail in the substance, and even though each element was a mineral according to its nature, the substance could not penetrate it or have an event or die, as a result of which the same thing happens because of the property that the fire reigns in the substance of the elements is so announced according to their materia. This is Raymond Lully word. The bodies created by the Creator under the hollow of the circle of the moon are part of the four elements with the four natural wet ones, namely cholera, blood, phlegm and melancholia, with the four complexions, the warm, cold, moisture and dryness, with the four colors white, black, citron and red. For tastes are unflavored, sweet and bitter. For smells good smelling, sharp and gentle, with the two tribes and genders, a male and a female according to their three dimensions, namely the length, height and depth. The common height is its manifest, the depth is its hidden, and the breadth is part of its mean. Therefore, all bodies according to these three dimensions can be presented in such a way that they can all be viewed as white and away. When the corpus is earthly in its height, there is something cold, dry and melancholy, bitter in it, sharp, sore, stinking, black and womanish. And from this it certainly follows that in its depths there is the airy, warm, moist, sanguine, citron, sweet, full of good smell and masculine. And when there is no water on one side, it follows that it is cold and damp, white and unpleasantly smelly and feminine. And on the other side there is certainly the fiery, warm, dry, red, bitter, sharp and manly, and that is the bond with which all bodies are joined together, which can be clearly seen in the melted body, namely in the gold, silver, lead, tin, iron, copper. Then this is the property of every element, that it has contradiction in itself and acts contrary to itself. And note the four elements are namely fire, air, water and earth. Then each of these is put together also the first two qualities, and not except the fire from the warm and dry, the air from the warm and moist, the water from the cold and moisten, the earth from the cold and dry. Likewise, the warmth in the season is its essential quality, and the dryness is its incidental quality. In the air the inessential quality is the moisture, but the accidental quality. In the water the moisture is fundamental and essentially the cold, but it is a coincidence. In the earth, drought is its forever, but by accident. Likewise, the fire is warm and dry for itself, but because of the properties. Then the difference in things is greater in terms of quality than in terms of properties. So also understand before other qualities of the elements the same thing Micretus says about the principles of the four elements. Know that the earth was first water, then it was turned into a stone and became hard, the water was first air, then it melted and became thick, and in water transforms the fire, but it was the beginning of the air, then it is made of thick fire. But the fire has no beginning except its creator, and understand that the earth is the body of water, but man becomes the body of the earth. But the fire does not read from the three elements through which all three of them also exist. And we say of its elements are steps, then the fire after which it is mixed is warm in the 4th degree, and dry in the 3rd degree. And because the warm is in him in the first place, it is obvious that nothing warmer is than the fire, and that in him is the dry thing in the other, so it is obvious when there is such a great dryness in him who has warm made it so quickly and dried so soon it warms up what doesn't make history. And the fire is cold in the 4th degree, moist but in the 3rd, whether the same to the contrary, it wants to be warm when it cannot be tsongulated into the dry, so that its cold remains, and so it is more cold than moist. Sorry, I wrote how I found it, but it seems to me that it's a contradiction. The air is firstly moist in the 4th degree, secondly warm in the middle of the 3rd degree, then the dampness corrupts and overwhelms the heat. The earth is first dry in the 4th degree, and secondly cold in the middle of the 3rd. And so the circulation of all the elements will be poured into the earth through the air, which makes the earth dry, and the air pours its moisture into the earth through the air, which makes the earth dry, and the dry earth expresses its dryness, which is made cold, moist and warm. The air is restored to it and refreshes the earth, its weakened and weakened earth, in turn, before the quality of the other elements of the same, the air, the moisture, the water, the cold, the earth its dryness. And so it becomes after the same mixing of the elements. Therefore the fire is in the water than it is in the air which is in the earth, and the water is in the fire than it is in the earth which is in the fire, and arises, and the earth is in the air than it is in the fire, that since it arises in the air, and so its mixing is terminable and can be drawn into any comparison. Raymundus says the same thing at the beginning of the Theorica Testamenti. Then the first beginning of everything with one another is a nature that God created out of nothing in a pure substance that we call the quintam essentium, the 5th essence in which the whole of nature is understood. From the same substance, divided into 3 parts according to their essence from the pure, God created the angels and the empyrean heaven. Through this clarity in truth the pure souls share with the angels in nature, through which sharing there is a perfect union between them in the glory. And from the other, God created the sky, which is the firmament, the planets, namely the sun and moon and all the stars, and from the 3rd part, which was not so pure and pure, God created this world. And you have to understand this not as it was told to you before, but as it was created entirely at the same time according to the will of the Supreme Creator, without any succession of effects and without any preceding material that looks to the descending generation or arth, which he regards as the succession of twins. Then let no creation or divine work prevent the Lord entities from looking at the Creator, which is drawn for creation apart from nothing in the essential entity. That's why you want to understand what I said and now want to say with I believe in the Spirit, and not coarse nor mean. Then we are talking here after looking at the work of nature which you can compare in our masterpiece, so we tell you this through an example that you can give us. You probably understand what has now been said. Then the Supreme Creator divided this impure part into 5 parts. In addition to a pure part, God quintam essentium, 5th essence, created the substance of the elements which is part of the heavenly things. And he divided this into the 4th part. The first purification is given to the God created apart from the other part from the nature of the elements. The other pure part is appropriated to the air which is created apart from the 3rd not so pure part of nature of the elements. And the 3rd, not entirely pure, is attributed to the fire which is an element created from the 4th impure part of the nature of the elements, and the 4th impure part is assigned to the earthly element which is created from the 5th part, so not entirely pure of the whole nature of the elements. And the more imperfect nature is, the more it desires its perfection and is accomplished one with the other because of the agreement of its created properties with its 5th instrument, which is partial to the heavenly cause. But there is an appetite for the perfection of nature, namely the generation into corruption and the corruption into generation. Then its stimulus and appetite do not come without means from the Creator of nature. When the event became such that the thing came from the Creator and not the creature, therefore it also defends itself perfectly and without spoiling, and therefore when it composes through the instigation of nature, she cannot make the thing perfect unless it is accomplished by the divine intelligible whiteness, like the human one, which is rectified by the divine intelligibility. So through the masterpiece of our work you can understand the nature of the first elements after the division of the 3rd substance, which is the initial one. You should not understand what your substance is the bad 5th element, but the 3rd or 4th substance, or the other or the first, which is the elemental of the 5th part, which we call the beginning, and the bad substance through which the previously mentioned 4 substance elementals, each being elemental, are explained according to their nature as above. These 4th elementa were created pure and clear because of the clear part of nature by which they were created until a certain time which came from nature or was predicted up to Anathul, but after that the people and animals died and those who grew earth dries up with the destruction of the generation that was drawn or taken before the corruption into the generation and afterwards from the generation into the corruption. Therefore this remains an impure resolute corpus, which has poisoned and corrupted the elementa, because of which corruption every visible thing cannot resist for long. Then nature cannot make a thing as perfect because of its coarse and corrupted material, as it did in its beginning. Yes, the more it continues with its effect, the more it becomes corrupted about nature, because imperfection is involved in great corruption because of the material of the elements, which is not always very pure. Then when it does now to transform it, that is what it needed back then attach the furthest part of the reins or ribbon together with it. And through them you can understand everything that prophesies that it will be consumed at the end of the world, when Jesus Christ will come to destroy the world through the gift from heaven, who will burn everything that is not of the truth of the fourth elements, and that whole people will be shamed by the unclean and evil in the abyss of the bright, but that few will be found composed of pure strength and virtue, that with the blessing you will visibly rest over the sphere for all eternity, and evil and unclean things will fall on the wicked and everything pure on the blessed. That's why it will become apparent to you with your reflection that in the end everything will go to its own place, which is why it will come in the first place. And understand once again that this actual earth that we third is not a true element, but rather it is composed of its true fifth elements. And the fifth elemental substance differs considerably from the elemental body from which the earth is formed. How the body without the soul and the putrefaction is brought into one and compared, or the material is put together without a shape and form, which is poisoned and infected by the aforementioned, through the disgusting action of the elements from one into the other. But in the body in the center of the earth there is a virgin and true element, which means that few people cannot be burned at the last judgment, and so you should clearly understand the other elements and put the former materials and bad substance together, which, with the division, form the formed ones into a contrary one. We have spoken with the division and said that its substantia is not separated, which is the quinta essentia, fifth essence, and from it there is a separate composite element for each individual. And as I have said, the earth that we third is not a pure element but is element with a natural and consistent element. Then in their center a virgin and true elementum is found. So you should also understand about other elements, and because there will be nothing from the pure and pure truth of the elements, it will burn and become completely nothing on the day of judgment. And then the elements will remain clear and louder in the earth, which shines like a crystal. And the highest Creator will make such a thing with the fire of heaven until the great world becomes the first cause, namely all the elements will be brought into their pure essence, which essence the fire will not fear afterwards. Then the motus or movement will become preferred to the upper nature without spoiling everything. And you should know that the three principle of all things is that which is artificial, and that God is the creator of all things, the other principle which is called specimens, apart from and from him, which is called his whiteness. The third following principle, which is called the materia created by him with the whiteness so composed by him, is the first element that we call hyle, which we want to explain to you when you will understand us correctly, because it is also unnecessary for you to mention such a thing in his species simplici to look for our effect at the beginning, whether you can't finish it without the quintam essentium, the fifth essence. But you should look for it in the composite species. Then, as I said, when all the elements of this substance are created, they are made alive by it to create and to destroy. Then it is necessary as it appears through nature. Now when everything that stands there under the globe luna is created and formed by the precolored material that is called hyle, that flows from it into every elemental thing and into one more than into the other, as we find through nature, and the all there is a room or walks, and it is his comfort, so be sure and confident that nothing in the world can be created or conceived without it, that it binds the corpus elementary together in the work of nature. And that's why we call it a nature and the first primordial of each element. Then, out of its bad substance, the elementa that exist purely create the materia of nature with the divine separation, namely the water, air, fire, which are elemental bodies through the precolored first bad element which is in them and from which comes understanding. The Chronica Mathoria says, then the species of the elements is found only in the boundaries and in the they precede the beginning, which is the first of the things. When you therefore want to understand such material, you should know that it is a purely subject and unio of forms in which each form is held with its power. Then this fluidity and indifference contains in itself innumerable movements according to the diversity of the last and middle forms which it takes into itself through a parable of the heavenly receptions of the last and middle shapes which is born in the heavenly nature which was of its nature. And through others in which it compares or explains the same vein through the direction of its possibilities. And through others it is called a possibility. Then it has no form in itself but must assume the form with the possibility of being seen through the white like the dark nut. So this material should be understood that one understands nothing about it and therefore becomes written the shape of the world as it is, and in this way the elements are ordered in the world from which everything is generated in the way it appears through the worm that follows. This is what Raymundus Lully says. He says the same about the fire that is from the worm that forms of the worm formal. Ex immedius in the tuba philosophorum, of all things that is the beginning of creatures is a nature and the same eternal and the first who cooks everything and brings it into natural form and shape. Why does he say the one is eternal and the first? Maybe someone would like to understand it from the first essence, namely creation, but it is not true. But he calls it an eternal that is spiritual, and first that is the more worthy of all the creatures that arise in the elements. Then who else is wrong, who digests and cooks and informs the natural worm with which all things become the right and formative figure and given shape? Mancherli I Retzel from the Philosophical Mon. Ptolemy says the same thing in Almagesto. Then the sun does not make the earth warm and also does not use the power of the earth without the help of the moon, which, among other signs and stars, takes more of the light and energy of the sun than the medium between the sun and the earth. That's why there are two obstacles, as the philosophers say, that one does not impress its strength on the other, namely that one is so far from the other and the medium between them is so equal, and so between the sun and the sun is far from the earth. And because the moon is the means in our alchemical art, the sun alone does not bring the tincture because of the means and help of the moon, then it is far from when the subtlety that affects it has not yet come, and also because of the means, namely the thickness and coarseness. Therefore the moon is necessarily required to make the sun subtle and thin and recede and to secrete its impurities. Since it needs more of their light, and the nature of other planets is metal. That is why Hermes and Aristotle say of the branches that sun is its father and moon is its mother. That's why the moon is the mother and field in which the seeds are to be dried and sown, and so we don't need anything other than what our stone and our alchemia then became of the moon and sun. Therefore, in the epistle of the sun to the moon in the year when the moon begins to be joined together with the sun in its lowliness and illuminated by it, the sun first says, "In my sister the moon changes the degree of its whiteness, and not with another except my servant. Then I am like a seed sown on a well-pure and pure land or dirt which sprouts and multiplies and brings usury to the one who so sown." And the sun continues to say to the moon, "I want to give you my beautiful one, namely the sunshine when we are in the slightest together." Then the moon says to the sun, "O sun, you need me like the hen's hands, and I need your good food. O sun, because you are perfect in your customs, a father of the bright ones, a high lord and great power, warm and dry, and I, moon, growing cold and moist when we are joined together in the equality of status and stay, in which nothing is then the easy thing that has difficulty with it, in which dwelling we will be idle by staying, and we will be equal to the man and woman who strive for noble birth and discipline. Then I will take from you the nature with hypocrisy that is the soul and wants through yours relatives become lowly, and then we want to be happy and merry at the same time with spiritual joy, that is in the way of the sublimated spirit, when we will ascend into the order of the highest ancient ones, and the lightness of the light, namely the sun, will be poured into my luminaries, that is the light of the moon outside you, namely the sun's, and outside me moon will be an infusion of the light into the light, that is a mixing of the lights, namely the wine with the water. And I, namely the moon, will forbid it from flowing before you become my swords in color like dinten have put on after my solution and coagulation. When we will go into the house of love, then my body will be coagulated, and on my birthday I will be the rising sun, and my body will be transformed into the adornment of the suns." Then the sun replied to moon, "O moon, when you do what you said and do not harm me, my corpus will come back, then I will give you a new power of penetration, which is the tincture through which you are powerful. You will be in the battle of the sea of melting and purification, from which you will go without reduction outside the darkness like the sun, and you will not be attacked or overcome like the lead, if you are not stubborn and resist. Blessed is the one who understands something in these statements and words of mine. The strength of the sulfur of the mercury is like the seed of the father and Luna the mother, that is the actual, the substance of mercury, namely the watery subtle mixed with the earthly subtle is equal to the menstruum, and that is argentum vivum, which is called mercurius by the philosophers. But because mercurius is the argentum vivum, the root of the art is alchemy, then out of him, through it and in him are all metals, as the philosophers say. Versus. Everything the wise are looking for is in the mercurio. Then under his shadow this substance lives and grows, which is why its middle substance is incombustible, as Geber says. Then everything of this art is from him, and with him every tincture is composed of its likeness, namely mercurio. The philosophers say, the radical principles of this widely called wisdom on which it is founded are these, namely a materia or unique substance of the argenti vivi and sulphurus, a smoking subtlest out of the nature of the now painted, namely argenti vivi and sulphurus, the brightest produced by our artifice and clear as a threne in which lies and dwells the spirit quinta essentia, fifth essence. But this substance is not the sulfur itself or the argentum vivum itself, as they are in their nature in their mineris, but is only a part of these two, which are not sulfur nor argentum vivum, as Geber says, which of the above-mentioned substances is smoked and fleeing and arises in its own substance, which then becomes another fixed and solid nature in the argenti vivi, and sulfur is figged and transformed, which can suffer the couple and does not flee from it but waits in it outside, or which is first songulated through the moderate boiling and conformation through the masterpiece of this whiteness with others that come to these into a flowing stone that forms tinging and remains in the sea. Note that this thing's two principles are namely the materia and the agent. But the materia is argentum vivum and sulfur or arsenicum, which is one. It is also to be noted that the philosophers say that the same argentum vivum and sulfur through which nature expresses its action and expression is the argentum vivum and sulfur brought into a watery, subtle, clearest and funniest nature, which the philosophists call argentum vivum, and into an earthly, subtlest material, which they call sulfur, through the trick which the philosophers have wonderfully hidden. The same argentum vivum and sulfur is one thing and consists of one thing. That it is a thing and is obvious that the philosophers call the reported argentum vivum sulfur, and the reported sulfur argentum vivum. Therefore Geber says, a stone is an artsnage, art, in which the entire magisterium stands. The other principle is the agent, therefore the same agent is that the material brings and moves to corruption, the worm which is an instrument that brings and moves to corruption and depravity, and there is no other agent in the world. Every corpus that suffers is brought back to its first materia through the effects of the forces, so that it reflects its nature, which first materia is argentum vivum, because it is a part of all things that can be melted and drawn. The materia prima but of the metals is the fat vapor that everyone's nature contains, namely mercury and sulphurus. Likewise, the moist fat is the materia of our argenti vivi philosophici, and the substance of its fatness is the actual essential material of sulphurus. In which you will be able to understand publicly that you cannot fix one thing without the other, like the materia without a form, which is why the sulfur stands like a complexing calor in the substance argenti vivi, and stands there like the strength of the male seed which stands in it women's seed, or like another procreative power. Raymundus says this. And there is nothing in the world that is not naturally composed of the substance of the four elements for the benefit of every natural good, and according to their experiences, there is nothing more essential than the sulfur and argento vivo, which are pure and incombustible in the first point of its creation, and that is the beginning, the genus or materia prima, and the middle substance into which nature incorporates and infects all its colors by inscribing various substantia. The same colors come through the properties of the fifth nature of sulfur and argenti vivi, Through the incitement of their nature from the fact that our stone is found in all places because of its properties, and through this experience we clearly recognize that this is the prima materia of all universals, through corruption and generation are formed according to their composition, and as in everything from such a material everything that is in the world takes its substantial form, spiritual and accidental. That is why it is found in all ears and in all things. Then, as Raymundus says, in all things, after their ultimate purification, the materia prima of all things is found in each of them in the form of mercurii, which materia is called the genera, being a real being, the limit of the material nature, in which nature takes its principia materialia, material principles. In the act of generation it is the first subject in nature. For then the species are transformed into a different form than they were first transformed, and not the species, but the individual species. Then these same individuals, being the filling or sensitive actions, are subjected to the fact that they are destructive to one another. But when the species are universal, they are not subject to the sensitive actions, and therefore they are not corruptible to themselves. But the species argenti, which is the silverness, is not transformed into the form of gold, which is gildenheit, auritas, or gildification, and neither on the other hand, namely the form of gold, is not transformed into the form of silver. Then the true and right species cannot be transformed, but the individual species are brought into their materiam primam. Then when its form and shape will be corrupted and resolute into the primam materiam, then another new form will necessarily be brought into it or introduced. Then the corruption of one is the generation of the other, because but the material cannot be destroyed in any way, so that it cannot be destroyed by one form would therefore remain. When a form of the metals is destroyed, it is introduced into each other without any means, namely through the transformation of mercury into sulfur. To our effect that we mean, each individual also multiplies the form of his own species, and not of another. As Aristotle and Raymundus say, when the first form of the body is formed through the wrong elementation in mercurium, it is in a black color, in a stinking smell, and subtly to be attacked in such a bad nature, but being the four elements put together can be destructive and can be resolute in water of the mercurii, after putrefaction. So far Raymundus, and when I say mercurial water I don't want to mean mere mercurium but the mercurium of the philosopherum, a red substance extracted from the mineris, which has the materia of sulfur and mercurium in it. That's why Lilius says, it is necessary to collect the sulfur in abundance, which swords the body. And such sulfur, we say, is the water that makes itself black and white and makes itself red and fixed. That is why mercurial water is the first material of all metals, and with it all metals are dissolved that cannot be dissolved in other water. And if the metals were not dissolved into their material primum by this mercurial water, then this was not brought about that one is looking for, as Aristotle says. And this is not the work of a craftsman but a work of nature which the craftsman helps and provides. Albertus says, then of all the arts, alchemy follows nature the most, and because of its cooking and reproduction then it is boiled in metallic fibers and red waters which contain the most of the form and the least of the materia. Then the other arts follow nature in the same way, alchemia, but with the pure truth. That is why it is not weaker than nature than an art or art master only serves him, but it is more natural white and is accomplished, and that is why it is said, you need that you in the solution of the lechter, lights, you first work, which is the first degree of the effects that they become argentum vivum. Then the philosophers say when the bodies do not become void bodies and the void bodies become good bodies, then you will not harm anything. And you shouldn't understand that the corpus became a bad, purely elemental corpus, because the bad is not changed and does not exist on the market of nature, but rather the well put together, that is the rough one, then an elemental element alone that makes one slow corruption and slow generation within oneself. And that's why the bad elements are of little use in this art, because they are not the essence of the elements, in which there are forces that transform, produce and destroy. That's why the bad elements, apart from the generation and corruption, are not without a cause, then they do not stir the natural moisture that makes everything come into being. And although it was immediately turned into water, it became dry by force, not by nature, like the salts and alums, and was thus melted by the heat. Also according to the truth of the matter, when the corpus should be brought into the first element according to the opinion of those who say that it has to be brought into water, the water was not the first among the elements, even though they say so and draw the saying here. Moses' first book is there. The Spirit of the Lord hovered over the water before the creation of the heavens and the earth as follows, not to mention that in the creation of the elementa the water was the element, since the elementa of air and sea were the first, as was said above. Although water is the first element in our work among the visible elements that we see and touch, there are only two element formalities in art that we see and touch or feel, namely water and earth, since you otherwise have the power, virtual leader, for the air is water and the earth is in the earth. Then Rhasis says, everything that is created under the globo lunari and by the highest craftsman has a share with the fourth element, not only through seeing but through effect and effect. Then we call the watery element the moisture of the water, the air, we call the nature of the air, the water that has the power it has with which it burns, calcines, and dissolves the bodies. The earth is the thick and coarse corpus in itself, and so the water and the earth are seen and felt by us, the other two are understood in these two. Therefore it follows and must follow that in the art of alchemia the metals are first brought into the mercurium, which is in argentum vivum, of which all metals are materia and sperm. Therefore Geber says, there is mercury boiled and made fat in the belly of the earth by the sulphureous light of whoever boils it. And after the transformation of the sulfur, and after its multiplication, various metals are created in the earth. Then their materia prima is one and the same, but they are different only by the accidental action, that is, large or small decoction, tempered or untempered, which burns or not, so all philosophy say unanimously, then each of these, namely the argentum vivum and so on sulfur is first transformed into an earthly substance, after which a very small smoke is released from these two earthly substances, which is the subtlest and purest because it is cooked and digested by the worm in the bowels of the earth and is transformed into the nature of an earth, so you take on a fixation and are transformed into a metal. Please note that the last term in nature is the transformation of the cooked and raw, namely what natural way an art master strives for and will is the substance of the sulfur, which does not burn when it is transformed. It is a close materia to our reles elixirus, royal elixir, and pure metals the first and the next nature that has changed through who my body is, namely with the change through which it could take on a more real and closer shape and form with the will of the congruent, match, mineral nature. And this moisture was no different in the argentum vivum, raised by the melted body inside and out. With this argento vivo, the qualities of the sulfur are mixed through the movement and therefore it is changed as nature requires through itself and its own values. Through the transformation of its nature it is transformed and frozen into sulfur, then you can take it away through nature. Other moisture more proper and finished is then transformed into the substantiam sulphurus, the substance of sulfur, into which the quality of its own sulfur, being sufficient, has been introduced by a natural understood which history through an artifice which moisture is argentum vivum in the form of a clear water like the milk in the heat and the sulfur, like the sperm in resticulus. The same argentum vivum has no contradiction that arises from its complexion, which is why such an argentum vivum is even tempered because of the complexion of its body. That's why I want to know that this materia of its own is not common to argentum vivum, with its entire substance. But the reason why you have to bring a metal to the nature of the vapor, then we see that everything is created through the help and means of mercurii vivi, so that it can also be created itself. As an example, man was begotten by his father through means and through the seed, and begets the other son also through the seed and thus from the others. That is why the mercurial nature is so that we are fed and nourished. Without mercurium, the life of animals and branches is not there. When you remove it from everything where you want, corruption and death follow soon after, because it is the ferment of the life and origin of all things, as the philosopher says. And Raymundus says, the body which is the first to be converted into the substantium of the sulfur was converted and converted. Then there is no argentum vivum finished transformed into the substantium of the sulfur, than that in which the sulfur's quality has been sufficiently guided through the dissolution. Nor is there a sulfur, which converts the argentum vivum finished then this into which substantia the argentum vivum itself stands, which is now transformed is through the understanding of nature and art that gold is transformed into materiam primam. Then, as the surrounding nature surrounds its own nature, the more friendly it is, the more external it is, as all philosophers shout and say, nature only rejoices in its nature and nature only commends its nature. And Hermes, it does not agree with the thing without what is closest to it in its nature and produces children or offspring in the thing that are like it. That is when you look for the artsnage, art, that produces the metals, then you will be the origin of the metals. Then the species is given by its genere tingeret, it would die. As the philosopher says. It is also an easy passage in which the people work together or collude with each other, and you should not understand that the metalla are brought into bad elemental water, then apart from that bad and simple nothing comes out of it but out of what is put together. Now comes the approach to the work. There are 4 governments or degrees in this art. The first degree of government history with calcination, the corpus should first be calcined. The other with the solve, then you should solve it. The third with the distillation, then it should be distilled or sublimated. The fourth with a mild fire congelorin, they would freeze, and in these 4 governments or gradibus, steps, stands the right and goods preparation, therefore the body and spiritus mercurii are 2 necessary things of this thing and work to perform miracles, as Geber says. The confidence stands in 2 things, to which also that third is placed, and says, 3 faces, that is 3 shapes I have seen in a father, that is gender or breeding that was born there. Then Morinus says, then 3 species are sufficient for the entire masterpiece, namely the white smoke, which is the 5th power, namely heavenly water, and the green lion and Hermetis, its silver, and with which they prepare the work at the beginning, in the middle and at the end. Likewise Eximidius in the tuba philosophorum. Through the tempered materials of fat, moist substance is extracted from the metallic material, which is subtly mixed with the earthly matter and is well purified, which is called elixir, with which the metals are transformed, which is why the external materials are required. That is what it is, artificial and material fire tempered and brassy warm, namely that the internal heat stays with it, it retains its moisture so that it naturally comes with itself when the external heat is too high, if it exceeds, so that the fat moisture is mixed with the subtle earthly one strong fire and does not wait in the body. Therefore, everything that is superfluous, coarse and solid must be gradually purified and made subtle through vigorous and long cooking. Likewise, everything in the world, that is, every elemental corpus, has within itself the warm radical or formal, through which cause it exists and by which its seed is multiplied. And in Mercurio this is his middle substantia in gold, his brimstone, which directs the materials to the end and to their natural form. And there is no thing so cold that it has not been wormed and preserved under the warm, namely when it is enclosed in it, then in the root, as the philosopher says, like the Mercurii, the earth is its actual tincture, very subtle, in which the light of the suns and menstruae is held, and the subtle middle substantia of Mercury, and the burden and foundation of the masterpiece. And if the material from which our medicine is made has its origin in the argento vivo, and from it should be created without any means to which you should not introduce anything else, then that comes from it in the peculiarity of its nature, and in the same step your son of the teaching is particularly told and shown that this material from which we make our medicine is not argentum vivum in its nature when it has now turned into sulfur, nor in its entire substance when the last or the outermost part of the earth and water will be separated from the same substantia. Yes, it is a blessed stone and spirit that is part of the 2 first ones. But even though the stone has become sulfur from its middle substantia, it is poorly called argentum vivum. Then the sulfur illuminates and decays before burning, which is his own creation as a sign of perfection, says Raymundus. And in addition to a pound of mercurii you will obviously have the medium laudanum, which is 2 drachmas, which takes the work and holds it in it to make a tincture or elixir. Khalid says, the water that is mercurius or argentum vivum no longer gives weight to the body as much as it has with it or in itself from the metallic moisture, then the moisture of the water disappears and the metallic remains. And the white redness of our ore transforms the metallic substance argenti vivi into redness and into a wonderful, strange gilder tincture. The father's seed and own substantia mercuria is his mother, then is menstruum that is to be erased, and only the father's seed is retained and accepted, which is his middle substantia, which brings about and protects this seed of mercury from burning and cannot be removed from mercurio either nit his menstruum, is that superfluous moisture departs from him without the coagulum, which has such seeds in the mercurio conguliare, to freeze, and he does not hold it in the superfluous moisture with it as. The coagulum of the milk coagulates the milk, and its better is the middle substantium to himself. And so the spirit, that is the water, will not be dissolved without the help of the body coagulate, it would coagulate, which is so dissolved in it because the bodies are the coagulum of this milk that is the mercury, and such a coagulum should be either the sun or the moon, so that it is in that Mercurio solves his problem. And yet only the moon to the wise and the sun to the white and red work. Then the sun's is called the ore hermetis, when the philosophers alone speak of their ore, that is of the suns they are such and such, or is a coagulum ars mercurium, that is our water coagulated. Then Constans says in the Taba, don't worry about anything else. Then there are two different argentum vivum, the fixed one in the ore and the fleeing one like that, that's Mercurius, and one keeps the other in his sight and prevents him the escape. And here you have the greatest secret. Likewise Raymundus says, the corpus in this art is a metallic ens in which the power of the mineral spirit rests. And the metals are the spirit from which every stone is made. The spirit, however, is said to be a mineral force in which the natures of the metals rest. And every stone is made from the metal spirit, and the same spirit, according to the way the alchemists consider it, is called Mercurius. Then he is called the first and next nature as considered in this art, and the first material of the metals, and can still be said the earth was brought to the earth, that something of the spirit remained with the earth, the mixed spirit was sublimated through the sublimation of the fire of the third degree, and was transformed into blistered earth, which is called the quinta essentia of the earths of the metals, and by several philosophers argentum vivum, Mercurius, or sulfur of nature. And the earth or dust as it remains is used as yeast or slag, a vaporized dust that you do not need. Then it is accursed dust that occurs when you read a little drem, but the argentum vivum that you have conquered is the earth of the body, which passes through the alembicum at the same time as the menstruo, and the sulfur of nature is the sublimated spirit of the metals, and the there is transformed and brought into the plastered earth, which is the first and next material of the metals. The prima materia is also called terra foliata. But it is necessary that the remaining spirit is transformed into blistered earth through sublimation, so that the pure is separated from the impure, the subtle from the thick and coarse earthly, and that the vitalizing spirit is drawn like the basolysis in the animals and the sulfur in the casting of metals. It is also necessary that you want to do something differently, which Henget and Comte from the first things, like the form of all forms that has settled into the four venerable natures, and is called the soul of the elements, and such that then every forma substantialis, substantial form, Comte comes from without any means of the fifth related things. We want it to be called a mother of all other formarum. And you should not understand that this form or spirit is warm or cold, wet or dry, neither man nor woman, but you should understand that because of its great perfection it is shared with each and every one of the other four natures. Then without in defense none complexion in a complex, as we see publicly and with certain experience recognize in the bond of joining and mixing of the four elements, which cause contradiction through their contradictory qualities, which contradiction the mentioned elements cannot reconcile for the fact that they were united and became one. If this was not the case, venerable means of defense which diffuses through all the elements and is shared with each of its natures and makes peace between the enemies. This is what Raymundus says. The strength of the sulfur mercurii is like the first seed and a mother, therefore he says his father is sun, which is sulfur, and the moon is the mother, which is the actual substance of the mercurii, namely the subtle watery substance mixed with the earthly subtle one like the menstruum. Its teacher is the earth, namely the earthly subtle in which it has the humidum radical. And the earth is called the mother of the elements. Then she bears the sun in her womb, that is to say that she must nourish him outside of the pure first substance. And the sun is called the corpus or terra foliata, that is the spiritus or dead body, and it is necessary that the spiritus, in which the entire power is inseparably placed, to his subtle earthly mind with a great and lovely understanding, do this moistly to dry it will be happy. Then the wet is the spirit and soul, the dry is called the earth or dead body, therefore they cannot enter the souls of the bodies without the spirit. And it is also necessary that we reveal the hidden, namely the warm and dry, and hide the revealed, namely the cold and moist. Likewise the stone is a moist water-based spirit, our mercurius, but that is the tincture is drawn from an incorruptible grain which was created by the divine is strong, and let me tell you that this mercurius is not mean because he would not be coagulated so soon. In the same way, above all, it will be useful and good to clean the spirit, namely mercury, from its superfluous liquids and to create a substance in it that you cannot find superfluous watery moisture. Nor is it an earthly substance that is combustible and poisons the plant, but only its fatty, airy substance in which the spiritus quintessentia is hidden, which alone is largely responsible for corrupting the gold and transforming it into its materiam primam. But it is the greatest secret in art and completely elucidated by the ancients that makes gold completely flee volatility, and transforms it so that it becomes spiritual. Which effect is wise and away as you know and see. Likewise the tincture is the composition of the stone of fire and air of gold or silver. Or so, it is a composite made up of the fire and air of gold or silver. Or so, it is a tinting body that comes from and is composed of two elements, namely the gold and the gold, the red and the silver the white. These descriptions are the form in which the tincture is viewed in this art, according to which you can recognize that every alchemical tincture is as necessary and comes from the metals now mentioned. The same thing brings something that is equal to it in nature and that is natural and artificial. Then gold is the starting point for everyone who wants to make art. Anyone who wants to report something should not look for a stone or a branch, but rather the fire, which is the beginning of the fire. That's why, dear son, when someone wants to make gold, metaphorically, don't look for sulfur, alum or arsenic, but rather the gold, which is the beginning of gold making. Tinging, with the tingerding, is transforming and bringing the tingerding into its nature and remaining with it without any separation, as in the nature of the figuring tingerding and the tingerding. The stone is a corpus composed of the quinta essentia, fifth essence, of metals, which is otherwise called argentum vivum, which is brought into the act by force, that is, because it could have become, it was made that way, of the power brought into the act through the masterpiece of all beginnings of this art. The oil is a mucilage, limacetas, siltinus, of all metals that floats over the menstruation after its dissolution, but it is necessary that the bodies are transformed into oil. If this is not the case, they will remain solid within themselves and what we are looking for will not become, and this was ultimately followed by a putrefaction at the very beginning of this art. The menstruum is that for the sake of which the bodies of the metals are dissolved with a natural dissolution and their spirits to potentia are brought ad actum, to act, and according to this definition and description it is indicated that the dissolution of the metals should not take place then begin with the pre-melted, and when if you did it differently, there would be no good effect but nothing at all. The elixir of the philosopherum is brought together from three sources, namely the moonstone, sunstone and mercurial. In the moonstone arises the white sulfur, and the sun the red sulfur, and the mercurial stone understands the white and red of both natures, and this is the star of the entire masterpiece. Rhazes says the same thing. The white and red come from one root and sprout except that there is no other kind of body in between, that is apart from the sun. Then when the sun is not there or absent, the mercury is robbed of its effect, then alone from the materia and form becomes the true one procreation. And in the flowers of the secret nuts it is said, make a flowering of the raw, or red, man and his white wife and you will have the complete masterpiece. And in the speculo, mirror, it is said, the philosophical stone rises from a humble thing into the most precious treasure, that is, from the seed of gold, rejected through the coitum into the bermutter mercurii, that is through the first mixing. That is why Verax says, when the sun is placed together with its equal, namely mercurio, there will be pregnant branches. Then the soul of the spirit and tincture come from them through a tempered fire. Likewise, the nature of this wise and red stone is that it holds the medium among the metals and argento vivo. Then the argentum vivum cannot be united with the metals in any way and with anything, just as the soul cannot be united with the body without the spirit, which holds the medium between the soul and the body, and that is why the wise also say, like a human being, our earth has a spirit corpus and a soul, for the sake of which they said three, and these three are one, and in one there are three of the spirit, body and soul become one, and all things are apart from one. And the preparation that they call is a transformation and division, in which it is transformed from one thing into the other, just as the human seed in the mother is transformed from one thing into the other in the natural preparation until a perfect human being is formed, which was its root and beginning. And it is not transformed by this, nor does it depart from its root, and from the division from one thing to that thing without the entry of another thing beyond that, without the blood menstruorum, out of which the seed was, that is out of the blood which is like him, and in this he makes his own. In the same way, an egg without the entry of another thing above it will be transformed from one state into another, and will be divided from one thing into one thing, and will easily become a young dog that will fly like the other from which it had the roots and beginning. In the same way, everything in the earth changes its appearance and is changed and corrupted, after which they sprout from greenery and are multiplied like the multiplied things from which they had their roots and beginnings. And that is why the minerals are not increased because they emerge from their roots, but each one compensates for what it was and is not transformed into something else. And whoever says otherwise is denying and speaking falsely. That is why this is the transformation and division that the wise want to have, just as the sperm philosopherum is water of life or living water, but the earth is an imperfect corpus, which earth is called a mother because it is the mother of all the elements. Therefore, when the sperm mercurii is put together with when the body is grounded, it is dissolved in the water of the semen and becomes water without division. Likewise, the entire benefit of this art is in the sun and mercury. Then, when they are both put together as one, they make the stone of the philosopherum, and have an unsealed tincture, then in the body it turns a color that is redder than blood. Then when a little of such colors is poured into white that is in moon, it changes the size of the white into citron color. But the preparation of these things from the beginning to the end is the venerable fixed water, then it reveals the tincture in the throwing and is a mediator between the contrary ones, and it is also the beginning of the middle and last. Whoever understands this has grasped whiteness. And know that there is no good in the imperfect body, that is accomplished through the fact that there is good in the perfect body. Then the perfect corpus, if it remains in its coarseness, cannot in any way or in the least have the power to separate the sulphureous earths from the mixed imperfect ones and to transform the same imperfect mixed ones into its perfect nature. That is why it is necessary that the perfect corpus is made subtle before it has enough power. But it is only then subtle when it has been brought to the living silveriness. And when the same living silverness of the perfect body is fixed, it represents the living silverness, which is not fixed, of the imperfect body. But the living silverness, which is not fixed, is there in the imperfect bodies, which, with its flight and speed, separates the living silverness which is there fixed from the perfect bodies and makes them glorious and fully accomplished through the process of transformation. Then it is certain that everything is from and outside of which it will be resolved against. But all metals will be brought back to the living silver, which is how they were before argentum vivum. And so the opposition and opinion of those who say that the species metallorum cannot be transformed is resolved and repealed, which is true, as they say, when one understands why they are not brought back ad prima materiam to the prime material. Then one has the right and actual seed of the metals from which the metals are created artificially. Then just as the metals were begotten by nature from the metal's own seed, so they can also be begotten in part by the same seeds. Then the argentum vivum of the perfect bodies is fixed when it has been boiled by the sulphureous light in the belly of the earth with a medium and temperate action, but the fixed sulphuriness and the fixed living silverness are a fixed substance in the defin of the substance of gold and silver. And such a substance is the subtlest and purest of an easy and slight melting like wax and is fixed over the battle of the fire. Therefore they coagulate through the mentioned sulfur and argentum vivum, the argentum vivum, and transform it into the sun and moon nature, solar and lunar in nature, natura silicica and lunicica, and also transform all metallic and imperfect bodies into a perfect sun and moon nature. That is why art is created beyond what is said here, like this whiteness in a few days or hours that nature does in 1,000 years. Merc. Each fixed salt is placed in front of a body or band, and such a salt is extracted from the calcined things, and our salt, which is a tincture, is extracted from lime of the metals through the putrefaction until the entire composite has laid down its nature and expressed it and accepts others. Of such a salt Senior says, firstly there will be ashes after salt, and from the same salt through various effects the mercurius philosophorum. Raymundus says, art always needs chalk, which is its own earth, in which the greatest mineral power is used to make the mercury hard, then it always flows through the middle and last of the stone, so it should not be forgotten, after which the spirit and soul of the body should reflect, and so the corpus is awakened and the spirit and soul in the body die, so that the saying of the philosopher so speaks became true. Whoever dies with me will also die with me again. Which you should understand. Then the spirit, which is mercurius, is the place and seat of the souls, and is the body of the mercurii, and the spirit is the dry water of the philosophorum, namely the middle substantia Mercury, who lives there, which spirit fills the soul of the perfect bodies. But the soul is the solvated tincture in the spirit, which is the water of the philosophorum. Then how the common tincture is carried in its water, and the cloths are tinted, and the dyed water runs into the cloth, and then the water deviates due to the drying out, and the tincture remains in the cloth. So the water of the wise, in which their tincture is what they bring over their white, blessed and thirsty earths, and the water philosophorum runs into their earths, and is physically stretched out in them and tinctures the earth. Afterwards, the spiritual water leaves the place, and the soul remains in the body, which is a tincture because it is a subtle smoke that cannot be seen, and its effect does not then appear in the body. Then our entire masterpiece will be with our water, and from it are all the necessary things. Then it dissolved the bodies with a philosophical solution that turned them into water, which is what they were initially like. As Socrates says, the secret of everything is life, namely water. As Hermes says, the water of the air that arises there and is between heaven and earth is the life of everything. Then the same water dissolves the body in spirit, and out of that dead it makes a living and a marriage between man and woman. Then it makes the whole joy of art. And note that the argentum vivum or spiritus is twofold, namely the two-tinged. The spirit prepared in this way dissolves the body and cleanses it of the corrupting causes, and draws out the other spirit that stands and influences the body and brings the body to itself through the dissolution and softens its hardness. Illuminates the body and raises it up, in which it separates and removes their darkness and impurity from the purest parts, and exalts the bodies, in which it brings them into a higher nature and makes them subtle because it becomes solid and spiritual. And these are the benefits and spices of the spirit, or argenti vivi, that prepares the body, and the tinging spirit is distinguished from him. This spirit, which is argentum vivum, is primarily grossly impure and volatile because of the sulfur, which it encounters in the various parts of the earth and is mixed into it through the seasoning, but the art which history through the distillation and sublimation it is renewed, cleaned, boiled, made thick and coagulated by the white and red sulfur. And this spirit that is prepared there is of two kinds. The first is a dry vapor, not glue-like, very sore acid, multi-acidines, very subtle, the one that breathes the face of the couple from a light one. It has a great power to penetrate and resolve the mineral bodies. And this spirit is called mercurius, in addition to the words that have many different meanings. But mercurius is a spirit, which is why he is also called a dry spirit with the first word, reason. And it is necessary for such a spirit to be sealed in a well-preserved oil jar, and that is what Albertus wants. Then the same spirit is produced from waterless things, ex rebus ponticis, from pontic matters, and he calls it wet, dry, and fertile. The other prepared spirit is moist in the vapor, not fat, but rather chewy and sticky beyond sore mediocre subtlety, which easily defies the impetuousness of the fire, and which in it does not become and perishes. It has the power to solve the bodies and spirit, and is a water that arises within itself. This is also what Albertus and many others want, even if they describe it in other things. And this spirit is also called a Mercurius with a very loud word, and this is beyond comparison and concordant speech. Then Mercurius, as the philosophers say, has the greatest virtue and strength to transform and permeate the body on a level. He does not stand and does not accept the test of the fire. He did not wait for the examination of the fire, so it is different from the two spirits, and for this reason they are both called Mercurii. In addition to these, take the right understanding in the sayings of the philosopherum, then the understanding will be easy in this and another, and you will see completely that the philosophy do not err among themselves, as many of them have held and viewed. And if you notice that a different one is fat, unctuosum, and a different one is glue-proof, viscosum, then a stone is prepared from the moist glue-proof one and produced from the fat one, but the metal. The tinging spirit, however, is the philosophical Mercurius with its red or white sulfur, which is naturally mixed with it and mixed into the minerals and veins or areas of the earth, viscera terra, mediocrely prepared and sent to the good grace of the art master until it is perfected. The other argentum vivum is a permanent tincture which is extracted from the perfect bodies through dissolution, distillation, sublimation and subtilization. And such an argentum vivum is called an incombustible oil, soul and air and a shine of the body. Then it gives an immortal or incorruptible eternal life to the deceased and imperfect metallic bodies, and therefore enlightens them. So zook the argentum vivum or philosophical stone apart from those bodies as from the argento vivo, then they are of the same nature. So you will have mercury and sulfur from the same material above the earth, from which gold and silver come and were created in the earth. The same thing is left in the tuba, that the whole truth in alchemical art is only this, namely that one puts the wet with the dry, and this is permitted by all philosophy. For the wet, I mean a spirit that is white or moist and cleansed of all filth, and for the dry, I mean a completely pure and calcined body, and then these two parts are certainly present, or are in the process of dissolving and coagulating. Dissolving is and means transforming the body into the nature of the spirit. But coagulating means, on the contrary, making the spirit corporal, and that the fixed becomes fleeting and the fleeing fixed, and then you will have the complete masterpiece. Now follows again from the beginning of the work, namely the preparation of the first mercurii. Remember, when our stone is made, place it with its entire substance in our vessel and close the mouth of the vessel completely with the excrement of the masterpiece so that it cannot breathe. Rule it in the made fire until most or more of it is turned into black dust, which will happen in 21 days, and then these distillations will happen, namely the solution distillation, division, putrefaction, washing off, ceration, coagulation or fixion. Likewise, the extraction of the tinctures is the first step. Nothing of the body remains in the body that does not rise with the moist spirit with which the body is made moist and wet and transformed into clear water. First the swords appear, and in the first work it becomes completely pure. The other thing is that the whole thing is dissolved, the moist corpus, I mean, and that it becomes earth, namely a stone, and earth, namely tsongolated in it in the color of the melted beaker. Their combination is extremely necessary, namely the body and spirit. And when you see at the beginning of its work as red grains, and in the coagulation as fish eyes and black pepper, you should know and consider that you have walked the right path. But when the entire mixture will be in vain and perish, you do not yet know how the spirit will be transformed into a body. Assiduous the philosopher says, "The earth is coagulated and becomes air, but the air is coagulated and becomes water, but the water is coagulated and becomes earth. Behold, the enemies come together in one nature, which when they are attacked they become enemies, namely in the separation of the elements. If you reverse this rule, on the contrary, you transform the body into a spirit. That is why you must make it completely small in the earth, that is, you must make the earth spiritual, that is tinging, and then you have accomplished the whole thing. That is why Plato says, you people, you should all know that every thickness rests in the earth, then the thick of the fire falls into the air, and the thick of the fires and the air falls into the water, and the thick that falls out of the thick of the fires, air and earth, is united, that falls there into the earth." Gratianus, when asked how does the body become a spirit, so he answered and said, "The earth is dissolved into water, the water into air, and the air into air, and this is the way through which the body becomes a spirit." Hermes says the same, put the man and the woman together in their own water, for without the man and woman no son is conceived. Another says the same, when the king saw that the water coagulated itself, he was certain that the thing was true and right as indicated by the will that one has sought of the sulfur with the mercurio. You should not understand anything else. Now follow then, put it in a wide glass and put it in the putrefaction between warm ashes and the ashes in which the glass stands, in which the old one sits, they should go up to the height of the same old one, namely to the height of the belly of the oil jug. So says Rosarius, and let it stand there for 40 days or more, depending on the size of the matter, until it is accomplished. This is what all philosophers do in common. Then every general action has a time in which it is accomplished and ends. As Aristotle says, Mundus and Atamius say in the Tuba, and put it in the putrefaction 40 days, that is 40 weeks a day by a week, as in the vulva the sperm shows up, that is 9 months or more according to the size of the material, then clean it him from his sword. And Rosarius says, you should be most careful in your purification and be careful not to stifle your active power or strangling strength in yourself. Then the seeds of all things that grow outside of the earth will not multiply, nor will they grow when their generative power is taken away by an external plant, as the philosopher says. And purify through the distillation first with a sweet distillate, then moderately distill the mercury with something strong fire, which mercurius the souls of the sun or moon after the sun and moon are all there with themselves, and do not distill with a strong desire that the earth's, that is the element of the earth's, also goes away in the distillation, because that alone is enough. The superfluous mercurius is the one who cannot be dried out with the body. And what remains in the cucurbita is our salt, that is our soil, and if it is black in color it is a trachea that eats its tail. Then is the trachea the materia remains in the ground after the distillation of the water, and the same water is called the tail of the trach, and the trachea is its swords, and the trachea is imbibed and coagulated with its water, and so it eats its tail, and you should eat the ashes like that. Basically, it is not to be disrespected, then it is the crown of your heart and an ashes of the lasting ones. As Morinus says, distill it with me so that the body is not brought back into a solid lump or even too dried out and burnt, and distill it with it such a few, fire, that when a drop starts to fall 68 as Arnoldus says, or 70, some say 80, you can count the moment before the other drop falls, and when the drop exceeds that amount, then draw out the few, fire, as Rosarius says. But if it goes slower, multiply it fire a little, and do not follow your previous training in imagination to make the fire stirker at the end of the distillation, but with a sweet and gentle fire, from which the following verse is made, when the other is made equal to the understanding, nature rejoices, and so expect the distillation with the patience of fulfillment. The sign of the completed distillation is that you have distilled the means of mercurii or more of the earth through the alembicum which you have placed over it, and that the earth remains white and melted, as Arnoldus says. Put this white earth into a glass that has a long neck, and seal it with the seal of Hermetus, and place it in warm ashes. First of all 8 days leisurely in warm ashes, the other days the ashes should be warm, and should stand in such ash for 25 or 30 natural days, so that the earth is dried out and dry remains in the bottom of the vessel. Then do agitation and movement of the vessel very strongly and quickly with your hand, then the material, that is the earth, will attach itself to the sides of the vessel. The more the materia is putrefied, the more attached it is, as Rosarius says. And since it became several times larger, Maiora reader, due to the destruction or extinction of the fire, ignis acasu, fire setting, and the material was stepped on too much to the other parts of the vessel, then it is necessary that the above-mentioned grinding in the glass also takes place, a glass club, and so you have the earth that was first. Then there are only 2 formal elements in our stone from which it is prepared, namely the water and earth, although all 4 elementa are powerfully virtual in it, and where it is said that our stone is from the 4 elements, that is not the case through the written understanding, by literal understanding, that it is earth, it is not water, air or water, but rather it is only a nature which has within it the nature and properties of all the elements. Likewise, the whole masterpiece is that one separates the elementa from the metals and purifies them, and separates the sulfurs of nature from the metals. Then in this lies the whole work, and the whole exhaustion of the masterpiece is in the division of the elements and the sulfur, Raymundus says this. But when it is said, as Hermetus used to say, you have to extract 4 elements, that is in truth no different than the seminarias virtuts, which excite the painful or suffering qualities, then those who want to interpret it in a more natural way, many of whom have fallen into unseemly errors. And we say that the same power is our spiritual, mineral, which can be made bigger and stronger so that the power was planted so that it can sprout and green. And when you want to take the mineral elements, you should not take them from the first or last ones but from the middle ones to create this stone, then the first ones are very bad, very simple, and the last ones are very rough, a lot of gross. If you want to eat, take bread and leave the meal alone, but if you want to make or bake bread, then take it slow down and let it go, that is our word and philosophical teaching. Raymundus says this. Likewise, the separation of the elements is a division and separation of coincidences. And the combination of the elements is that one piles together and brings together what is there from the nature of the moist radical, as the tuba philosopherum says. Raymundus also says. You should have been patient in the revelation, then there is a lot of slowness in it. Likewise the sword is in every putrefaction, it should always be greater in the work of the sun than in the work of the moon. As Rosarius says, then the sun has the least sulfur of all bodies, but still contains within itself a larger size of the argenti vivi, from which these swords come. As Geber says, then take the black, grated earth and imbibe it with the sulfur, so that alone the material that covers the earth is said to be floating 2 or 3 fingers high above it. But the first is better than the philosopher says, so that the Asur is not drowned, and seal the glass with the Hermetus seal as was said above, but this is so that those who do and eat like this do not deviate from those who suffer until they come to complete boiling and put it in warm ashes to dry. And on the other hand, you should do this by soaking it up and drying it out, and also for the 3rd and 4th time until the earth is white enough with a fixed whiteness. Be careful not to mix the mercurial impure water with the pure body, then as the moisture of the mercurial water will be, so will the cleanliness of the body with which water the body is washed, and the more the body is washed, the more he also becomes whiter. Then, with the preparation of its perfect fermentation, it is coated with water and spices. Therefore, when the body is not completely white, rub it with water, then repeat and dry. Then the azoth, which is the mercurial water, and fire wash the ladanum, which is the black earth, and cleanse it and take away its darkness, as the philosopher says. Then the preparation of the earth with the water is always about how bright the water will be, so the earth will also be. This shall take place in the whitening of the earth and the washing away. Therefore, do not allow yourself to endure such a lengthy repetition of grinding and frying. Then it is a natural action that has its modum or movement and a certain time, so that many end in a larger space of time but in a few. Methodus says, then in 40 days and 40 nights the whole work will be accomplished to the white on the right, and will be the purification of the stone. Then in a cleaning there can be no certain specific time as according to which the master artist works. And in 90 days and nights the work will be fulfilled to the red. And these are the right times for such great perfection. And in 150 days and nights with the ferment to the entire perfection of which this versus was made. The decoction of things history in 150 days. The cooking of things takes place 3 times in 50 days. Then Pandolphus says in the Tuba, then the body is reduced in its decoction in the 4th part, and Astantius says, that the 4th part of the body is reduced in its decoction. And in the composition of the moistening of the black earths with mercurio one should ensure that the glass does not break as Rosarius says, therefore one should keep and notice that the water is warm and also the material, that is, the earth of the same shape is warm, and that the vessel should be driven by hand and held again in the worm and driven again quickly and quickly, then the material will hang on the sides of the vessel. The material will bite and the whole thing will become like a torn mud. Turbid mud when everything goes together like young beer. And then the glass should be sealed and it should be placed between warm ashes so that it dries out, as it did above, until it becomes dry dust. And one must be careful that the spirit, which dries out the body and is dried out by the body, does not become fleeting, then when it flees from the body cannot be perfect. That is why it is also required that the vessel be sealed with Hermetes' seal. Then, wherein our art the vessel was not closed to contain the spirit, all the power went out as in the creation of a metal. Then when the smoke from which the metal was produced found an open place in the earth, it blew out and produced no metal. Therefore it is also history that those who do this do not deviate from those who suffer until they come to a complete decoction and are brought as indicated above. And the time of each moistening to dry out is 25 natural days or in 30. Arnoldus says, although Rosarius speaks against it, when the imperfect body that is the earth will be a pound of 12 ounces, it will be fig with its moistening in 90 days. The philosophers say that it will be accomplished as said, sometimes it will take more or less time depending on the skill of the worm and because of the larger or smaller size of the pigment. This is what I understand about the entire period of moistening the whiteness and redness. And this solution and coagulation or desiccation of the black earths repeat 4 times, and when the 4 changes solution and coagulation, that is desiccation of the black earths, is fulfilled, then this earth will remain fixed and bright, black in the fracture, and when it is thrown onto the body's ends they are the same in his color. And the more this earth is solvated and coagulated, the more penetrating and subtle it will be in its nature. Another says, that is why you will have to repeat the order of imbibition of the earth of the retained water of the pearl, desiccation and calcination, 4 times, and so you have sufficiently washed off the precious earth of the stone and administered the decoction. And through this degree of boiling of the water, drying out and calcination, you have sufficiently cleaned the raven's head, the black and stinking earth, and brought it to the whiteness by the fire's power and calcination, which is convenient to accept the fermentation, which fermentation is the animatio or soul of the stone. Socrates says, for decoctions are made leisurely one after the other, after which it should be brought to life through the fermentum and boiled again. Then he says, set him with his water and boil him, until he melts and becomes white. After this one cooks again, it turns red and has a lovely composition. Then you should boil it again with stronger fermentation, and this is the last boiling in which the body is fermented and transformed into a spirit, and so there are 7 decoctions everywhere and in total, namely 4 before the vivification, that is fermentation, and then 3 are signified by the 7 roastings, as the philosopher also says, our replacement has a dropsy body like Nahum the Syrius had a leprosy. So he sought the bath of rebirth and renewal 7 times in the Jordan so that he could be cleansed of his innate suffering and corruption. Then you have sulfur and arsenicum, which doesn't burn, which the alchemists can use, and with it they make perfect silver. Gratianus says, therefore make the latinum white, that is the ore with the mercurio. Then latin is a composite body made up of the sun and moon and imperfect citron, which when you have made it white and brought it to the previous citron quality through constant boiling, you again have a latinum, which you can draw in the same shape and to a size that suits you. Then you have entered through the door and have the beginning of art. And then clasinere, dissolvier and inserior, and continue so through the medium, and when you awaken it and make it permeate you have come to the end. Then Rhasis, Morienus and Assiduous say, then while the earth is made white it becomes fixed because of the fixation of the mons, but not fixed with the fixation of the sun, and therefore it tings in luna. And then in the work of the moon there is a leap, which is the sublimation of the moisture of the moon and the circle of the sun. Then after the extraction of the spiritus solaris from the dead body, the history of both the replacement of the souls and the making of the body alive. Plato says, then in all silver there is white sulfur, just as in all gold there is red sulfur, and such sulfur is not found on earth, as Avicenna says, as it arises in these 2 bodies. And that is why we prepare these bodies very subtly, so that we have sulfur and argentum vivum from the same material above the earth from which gold and silver were made under the earth. Another way of destroying it, some people do it with the earth. When you have the dried earth, put it in a glass and put over it or on top of it the 6th or 7th part of the mercurio so that it is dissolved, therefore weigh it first and seal it hermetis so that the flower does not bloom, and make it dry and congeal over it mildly, turn into ashes, and such solution and congelation repeat 4 times. When the 4th change with the solution and congelation of our earths is fulfilled, this earth will remain fixed and bright, black in the fracture, and when it is thrown onto the bodies it changes its color but not the mercury. And the more this earth is solvated and songulated, the more penetrating and subtle it becomes in its nature, as also said above, the more it leans towards white in these 4 solvations and congelations. But when this decoction will be fulfilled, which is called the first one, it must be transformed into the other one in this white way. You should know the weight of the whole songulated as you first knew through your division, and put it in a glass and put on it the 4th part of mercurii, so that it was dissolved, and seal the vessel like hermetic above, and make it dry and congeal over the verm, and a lump of a different color will be the first one, a little black and clear. But the disposition of the divination is confirmed and continued according to the same water imbibition and drying out solution and congelation until it becomes a white lump of a perfect divination, which is emitted in the fall and flows. The mercury congelates perfectly, and every imperfect metallic corpus is transformed into one lanificum and real corpus. And if you want to make your prepared elixir flee and imbibe with the other 3rd and 4th change, this should be done with the 4th part of elixir mercurii. But if you put a greater weight of water over the body, then a 4th part of it will not be drowned, it will be better, it will make the body white, and it will be more subtle and penetrating and transformed with greater weight. Likewise, when a thing is imbibed with corruption, the fire cannot tolerate it, the fire cannot tolerate the corruption in it either, so it is necessary that the stone is masterfully and artificially extracted, purified and separated from all its corrupting agents before you take it for yourself to fix it until it is a pure element of the first thing. And note that there is a more subtle artsnage that transforms the mercury than this one that transforms the bodies. Therefore, one should know that there is more work in whitening because of the weights and mixtures than in the raw. Then after the whitening there is no error or redness. And about the reddening it is said that it should be done on the same white and with the same government in all as you did in his whitening, and one should not start it again from the beginning but multiply it alone, and put as much of the mercurio through the solution of the earth and the same drying out as you did in whitening, without only that the verm is larger. And you should know the more the soul is dissolved and coagulated with its spirit, which is not fixed, that is with its water, the more it multiplies, and not only in size but also in the power and subtlety of the tincture, and in the rejection it will transform a great weight from the whiteness of the earth. Says Halley, take what rises to the bottom of the vessel and wash it off in warm water. Swords are taken away and its thickness deviates, and the blockages of moisture escape from it until there is completely white chalk in it, not a speck. Then after that the earth is comfortable and the soul can accept it. Then the whitening is the beginning and foundation of the entire work. Then after this you cannot feel it in the decoction. Then after the whitening, both fleeing ones, namely the soul, that is the mercurius of the body, and spirit, that is the living mercurius, who transform the earth into one not fleeing and make them spiritual, pure from earthliness, airy and subtle. And so the spirit and soul are not properly united with the body then in the white colors, then as then all the colors that one sees in the world today appear in the same whiteness you can invent and devise, and are then attached and come together in one color, namely the white, and about each other. And note that the same variety of colors does not appear in our stone when the souls are joined to the body, as Morinus says, only in a change does the variety of colors in it appear. The soul is a tinging spirit which, finally surpassed by the corrupted body, rejoices that it has become incorruptible. And so one goes into the other, and one takes power over the other through the order of nature. And so Senior says, the first work of the moon, opus lunari lunar work, is to wash off, whiten and purify in 150 days. And the prophecy of the whole and the driving away of the dark nuts from him. And Phlidius says, know that the beginning of the whole work is the whiteness on which the red follows, after that the perfection of the work, but after this, by God's will, with the vinegar the whole perfection which is dissolves and coagulates. And of the earth that has been made white, Morinus says, then you should not do anything with it unless it has fermented. And because without the ferment there will be no perfect tincture, as the philosophers say, and good bread will not be made without the fermented pasta, so in our stone when the ferment is like the soul that gives life to the imperfect dead body through the help of the spirit, that is the mercurii. Then Aristotle says, nothing is fulfilled without the subtle ferment as the spirit. Therefore it is said that for a good pasta you should use water and ferment. Likewise in our stone these three will be found similar to the sayings of the philosopherum. And if there is no other ferment then the sun of both the white and the red elixir and the moon alone the white elixir, namely gold or silver, the philosopherum is not the gold or silver of nature, therefore the ferment of gold is nothing other than its sulfur of the white in silver, then it never pretends that what is not or has not been naturally fixed. Likewise, the fermentum is made from the pure material of metals, which is from the sulfurs of nature and vapors of the elements. The fermentum is no different than that of the sun and moon. And if there is not a ferment until the bodies are transformed into their materiam primam and nature, then it is good and necessary that a ferment should be made outside of the suns and subtlest earths. Therefore, if you do not know how to bring two perfect bodies into their first nature, you cannot have any ferment, says Raymundus. Merc, so the white fermentum will be. Spit a part of the purest moon, very finely chopped or subtly buttered, with twice the amount of its wool-cleaned mercurii, and at the same time rub it completely hard in a stone mortar. The mercurii drinks out the same filling and becomes like butter, so that nothing of the limatura can be found anymore. Then wash this ferment off finely with vinegar, which is also strong, and common salt, which is well prepared until a clear and very pure vinegar comes out, and then wash off the salt with sweet water and make the water dry with the salt. After this, put a part of the white sulfur over it and at the same time rub it completely, bite it completely into a corpus, then mix it with a part of the water and start to sublimate it and see. It is precisely in this way that the red fermentum is created, with the purest sun as said above, although Pandolphus says in the Tubba that no tingling poison is conceived without the suns and their shadow, which many others also want to say. Then there is no other ferment, as well as the white tincture than the red tincture than the suns. Aristotle, the white and the red spring from one root, so that there is no thing in between that is of a different kind. Rosarius and Petrus de Zalento say the fermentum, which is a compound medium when it is placed at the beginning or middle, the work is accomplished sooner and does not need to be repeated, and yet they do not say this as a denial. Arnoldus says, but if you want to ferment the pre-mixed medicine, dissolve it in the mentioned distilled liquid as said above until it is as strong as mercurius. Then put it in a vessel over the water in the entire government until the colors appear as in the first government, until you will have the elixir as before that you can pour it, and that tinting as then the effect and effect of the same elixir has been made twice in the fermentation, great and rejection. Then in every solution and fixation it ascribes 10 to it in the increase, because the more you dissolve, tint and drink this medicine, the better and more powerful it works. Note the same thing about the fermento, apart from the perfect, nothing becomes then it is now perfect as long as the materia or artifice achieves it. We have an example. A fermented or baked bread that is perfect in its state or nature and has come to its final end, and you cannot continue to ferment with it. So in gold too, the refined gold is drawn through the test of the fire into a solid and fixed corpus, and it is impossible for philosophy to ferment further or more with it if one does not have the first material of the metals which it was resolved into the primam materiam, and into miscellaneous elements. Therefore we want to take the materiam from which the gold will be, and with the help of the artist we will bring it into the right fermentum philosopherum, the leaven of the philosophers, and we want to transform this with understanding into a perfect materiam or in a species of perfect bodies, and then we finally want to start working. That's why you've been cheated on them much now, even if you've already worked on philosophus, and then you leave it alone and lie there. Please note that the water is a spirit that cleanses the corpus subtly and makes it white, and the fermentum is the soul that, through the means of water, gives life to the imperfect body that it did not have before and brings it back into a better form and appearance. Even in ours, if stones only protect one, then the medicine will never flow easily, nor will there be any tincture, and when there is one, it will flow in a smoke like mercurius, then there will be no place in it to accept the tincture. And in the hour of composition the greatest miracles appear, as the imperfect body is fermented and colored with a solid color by means of the ferment which is the soul of the imperfect body, and the spirit is put together with the body by means of the souls, and with at the same time bound to it in the color of the ferment, it is put together and becomes one with them. And so in an imperfect body first the pure will be separated from the impure, the subtle from the gross, after which it will be made dry and fig, and it will be dead, then it will be fermented and made alive by the ferment which is the soul. Then if you do not mix the ferment with the elixir, the body will not be fermented as it should, because without the ferment neither the sun or the moon will go out, but something else that will not remain in the tincture of a metallic nature unless you prepare the imperfect corpus. Therefore put the sulfur, which is the imperfect body, together with this ferment so that it produces the same thing and becomes an elixir. But when the sulfur, that is the imperfect body with its body, is fermento, it will be put together, so the body does not have to act in it until it transforms it completely into itself, namely into the fermentum. If you want to ferment for this reason, mix it with the body at the same time so that the whole thing is a ferment, then the ferment will bring our sulfur back to its nature, weight and color through all the paths that will also be there, a white ferment to the white and a raw to the red, which is revealed. Then when you put the ferment of the silver with the sulfur of the gold, it will bring it back to its nature but not to its color. Likewise, when you put the ferment of gold with the sulfur of silver, it changes it to its nature and not to its color. So also in contrast. Therefore you should not mix the white water with the red, nor should you mix the red water with the white, then with the white water you will make it white and with the red you will make it red. But dear son, you shouldn't just think that this water is red, but rather look at it with the force of making it red with the effect and effect. This is what Raymundus says. Now when the corpus is cleansed and incorporated with the spirit and sublimated and then both of them become a fat vapor, and when the body does not become a vapor, you have accomplished nothing in the work, because such history occurs through the means of the purified mercurial water. Therefore whiten and wash the body, then the whitening is the beginning and ferment of the entire perfect work. If the sulfur is not sublimated, it will not have the incoming substance and through force, and will not count as part of the elixir be useful. And the common mercurius is called a spirit, the mercurii of the body, but is called a soul, and the spirit is not made into the body without the soul, and conversely the soul is not made into the body without the spirit. It alone should be made subtle, it is one with him and equal to his spirit. Then they are mixed by the slightest, and first of all take into account the nature of the ferment and its power to tint. The spirit is not put together with the bodies until they have been completely cleansed of their impurities, that is, until the medium substantia of mercury and sulfur of the body is completely cleansed of their filth. This is not possible for their composition unless they have first become spiritual through the transformation of each one of his virtues and characteristics through the perversion of their natures. They are put together in all sorts of ways, and then when they are to be purified they are put together in the bodies. This is a flowering between them with the fermento through the help of the water power, is a combination or union. Rhasis says, the accidental things cannot extend quality unless they are associated with the substance. Likewise, if you want the elixir to be perfected and the transubstantiated and every corpus so placed to it, this cannot happen then through its openness repeated solution. Therefore, quinta essentia fifth essence is a corpus that is distinct from all elements and elemental things, both in the materia and form, as well as in the strength, that does not have in itself any contradiction and therefore no cause of corruption. Thomas writes this in his compendium, or a short excerpt in which he makes the difference between the elementals and the quinta essentia. The way to make the solution is this. After our stone was made in the fire and cleansed of all the filth that is uncleanness, this is according to the divination and philosophical spiritual purification that is told above. Then rub it in a very subtle dust in a stone and dissolve it in our heavenly vinegar, and it will soon be dissolved into the brightest water and immediately like a fountain of water. And after the stone will be completely solvated, as I said, distill with our distillation and coagulation with tempered verm, and finally calcine with the first coagulation according to its type. And you should know that in the same solution of the stone apart, many more parts of the mercurii or of each body are tinged into the right mons or suns according to which the stone will be prepared. And this our solution is our secret, and so you will multiply the stone, as will be said later in the chapter about multiplication and multiplication. In the same way, one must separate the common earths from the philosophical ones. One must take the calcined earths and place them in glass containers in which there is pure and hottest water, and drive it with a glass rod until what can be solvated is completely solvated. And you should know that the good earth is dissolved and the water becomes white, namely that when it dissolves, Put it in part and rub the earth again so that it is not dissolved, and again put warm water on it until you do it publicly and obviously you don't see anything more can be solved. What sign is that the earth basically remained like this is when it is placed over a piece of wood, nothing remains of it. The other sign when it is placed over fire is that it is not poured with anything and does not burn either. But after you see this, take your dissolved soil in the pre-mixed water and put it in a glass vessel. Then you will congelate it with a strong dryness, and before it has been songulated you will know that you have the pure and prepared philosophical soil. The others should be thrown away. Then she's just fussing and slagging. It is also called white earth, and watch out for not frying it unless it is dry. Therefore Hermes says, so your gold in the white, flaky earth that has been made subtle and airy through the calcination, namely so much seat the gold that the soul and tinging strengths in the white earth that has become white and pure with natural preparation there is no filth. Apart from these it is evident that the gold of nature is not the materia of the ferment but the philosopherum, its gold is the tinging ferment. In the same way, Hermes, the head of the philosophers, you alchemists, says when you want to mix the natures with each other, mix the stone of gold, the wet one, which is a permanent water, and put it in its vessel over the mild water until it melts, then load it so the water bites it dried up and confirmed itself under long. But when the water is imbued, it is dry, so the few years will be dry, then it will dry out and the earth will become dust. But when this happens, you know that this is the beginning of the secret use, namely using the water to completely imbue and dry it. But do this and repeat it so often until some of the water dies that it languishes, namely that it no longer rises and its proper colors appear to you. But I don't tell you to pour the water at the same time so that the Eichkieser isn't drowned, but rather slowly, that 7 times, pour it, rub it and dry it and do it repeatedly until the water is taken away. So Basin says in the Tubba, the water is given to him 7 times until the entire moist trinket is taken and the power is taken over the fire during the battle of the fire and it becomes a rust. Hermes speaks wetly and rubs many days, and he has ordered this to be solved and coagulated with 9 changes, which changes are signified and understood by the 9 eagles. Then in every solution and coagulation its effect and strength will be increased. That's why a philosopher in the Tubba says, you who research this art, all of you together, when you will see that this white one appears in the vessel, you will be sure that the red one is hidden in white. But after that you don't have to take it out, just boil it until it becomes completely red, and through so much moistening of the water the sun will require that the earth will be made red even through larger amounts of water. Barson, I order them to make the earths white with the wisest water so that they make the earths wroth, namely our earths. That's why it first has to become white before it turns red, then there is no passage from the last and back to the last, or from the unsavory into the repugnant, then through a proper means, that is from the Schwerza there is no passage into citrinum or red without through the means and help the white, then the citron comes from the highest white and a little clear red essentially. That is why nature shows that citronatio is a perfect and fulfilled digestion. On the contrary, there can be no passage from the citron to the white until the composite is transformed into black. Gold cannot become indestructible silver unless it is destroyed and blackened and spoils the better, nor can it become worse through its corruption. When one is begotten, the other spoils. And such a story with the addition of the thing, such a tinge, which is a mercy in nota, is of nature and is accomplished. And then the fermentum is put on it. The spirit dries up the body and is dried up by the body when it is completely cleansed of its phlegma. Please note that in every roasting and decoction through which the spirit and body are separated and united together, you should know that the soul can thus be separated from its subject, which is not appropriately separated from the fixed. Then in the drying the living does not become appropriate either, then placed together with the deceased in the damp. But in all of these, nature does not suffer the sudden changes, so one must be careful that the spirit does not become volatile when it escapes from the body, so the body remains imperfect. Merck therefore tells the story of sublimation, that when the purest and lightest parts are separated from the hands of the gross elements they possess and raise the power of the fifth essence, which forms and orders it into a defensive and perfect form. But I call the quintam essentium the fifth essence, a tinged soul that forbits and introduces a pure form for which sublimation and subtilization were highly necessary. Then the fatness of the arsenic, or the purest oil-like nature, is extracted, and that is an incombustible fatness that is bound and mixed with the yeast slags and coarser elements. Then the history of sublimation, for no other reason than that the tingling soul was extracted from the body and transformed into a penetrating spirit. Then through sublimation the body is brought back into a spirit, when the thickness of the body becomes thin. And because the bodies are heavy and important, as has been said above, when they should be sublimated because of this, they must be incorporated and sublimated with the mercurio and also cooked until a corpus becomes out of them, namely out of the mercurio and body, and you should not let yourself get upset. Repeat this often. When mercurius is not incorporated into the body, it does not rise. But it cannot be incorporated unless it is first dissolved in mercurio. Therefore, take the first water, separated from all corruption, and cook the thing called with its name for 40 days in its vessel. You will find that the body is transformed into argentum vivum, and when it is dazed by the sublimation of its swords it will be a high nature that has no shadow, that is coarse dirty earth and burning. Therefore, the more you can, so subtler the body, and cook it with pure mercurio, and when the corpus has taken part of the mercurii into itself and enclosed it, sublimate it with quick fire and as strongly as you can until it rises in the likeness of the whitest dust like snow that hangs on the sides of aluminum. Spondylibus a little adherens, a little was clinging to the spondles, the ashes, but so in the reason remains is yeast, and the dross of the body is not good and should be thrown away, in which there is no life. Then it is the lightest dust that easily disappears when you blow on it a little, then it is nothing. Then spoiled sulfur excluded from nature when the yeasts are thrown away. Then repeat the sublimation of the whitest dust without its yeasts until it is figured and until it does not read other yeasts but rises like the brightest snow, which is our purest quinta essentia. And then you have a tinged soul that coagulates and purifies, and a sulfur and arsenicum that does not burn, which the alchemists need. Come and use it to make silver. But even if a part of the materia solari appears very white, the tinged fire with red like scarlat remains. And this sulfur transforms the argentum vivum into the purest and best gold. This is the most popular composition of the white and red sulfur, which does not burn, after the highest effect of the philosopherum. Then you will find nothing superfluous or less in these sayings, but everything that has philosophical truth in it. If you also sublimate mercurio with the lime of the two lights, namely the sun and the moon, you will sublimate it usefully and cleanse it quite easily. Then in them there is a slight sublimation of their effect through procreation, and always left only the sublimated in abundance. Then it is not fixed, but in the middle stands a little over the yeasts. Then that is the subtle middle substance of the mercurii from which our medicine is made, which takes its origin and has, in addition to the materia argenti vivi, the sought-after good, the white striped earth arsenicum and white sulfur, the materia prima of the metals, says Raymundus. But we do this sublimation, that we refract the bodies into a subtle nature, because they are like a spirit that penetrates through and brings all bodies into the mon and solar, or that we refract them into material primum, namely mercury and sulfur, and that they are incorporated to the utmost, and that they also take on the imperfect color of white and red, which color cannot happen without sublimation. And you should not mix what remains at the bottom with what arises, but rather set each of them separately. But when there is still something fundamentally left of the good material, you should repeat it to sublimate through the mercury that is incorporated into it until everything that is there from the pure and pure vinegar of the same body will rise. If you will not do such a thing, you should not do it. Put in the masterpiece and bring it. The alembicum should be glazed and smeared with good excrement, which should be put together with the subjecto that mercurius could not finally exude. Then mercurius is not sublimated then by the airy moisture which carries with it the purest parts of the body, and therefore the earth is transformed into air, and the body into spirit, and the thickness into thinness, and finally they rise up to the heights like air, so that because of the truth they strongly accept the virtue and push through into it, and because of the perfect clarification, perfect tincture and coloration. Therefore, work diligently to ensure that the vessels are put together. Then where Mercurius finds his open place he flies out through the smoke, and you will die, and the effect will be nullified, and your masterpiece will be in vain. Now the fixation follows from the government. How the white-red sulfur is brought into the popular elixir. So take the pre-coated white sulfur, fix it white over his body, and that is purified over the silver. And the red sulfur over his red body, namely over the gold, as Pythagoras and Magister Tuba teach about it, in which he says that the extracted argentum vivum, through the dissolution and subtilization of these bodies, is not coagulated in white or red sulfur. The fire stands out, that is, that it is fixed. There is no way he speaks to the white or red, therefore must appear whitish and neat. Then without the fermentum there can be neither sun nor moon. And there is no other ferment than the sun and moon. Then the covered sulfur will not remain in the essence of nature, which sulfur the philosophers call the fat vapor, if you do not put it together with his cleansed body, so that it produces the same thing for him. And also that's why what you put together becomes a perfect elixir. But when the sulfur has been added to its purified body, it does not stop doing or working in the same body by penetrating it completely until it completely transforms it into its nature. If you want to ferment for this reason, mix the sublimated body with its well-purified body so that it becomes entirely a ferment. Then the ferment brings the brimstone of art or the philosophizing into its natural color and taste. Then when the sulfur will not be sublimated, it will not have the incoming substance and through penetrated strength, and that much more so it will also have no strength to make the goods elixir. Then when it remains in its thickness and corporality, it will, if things are not mixed with tinged animals, they will not be able to be transformed into the form of metals. But when the body is cleansed and incorporated with the spirit, it rises in sublimation, and then they both become a fat vapor and are robbed of the burning substances. A subtle breath louder and a great force through urgent force clears a soul of the vices and filth. Then and there when she is done to her purified body by means of spirit, which is purified with mercurial water, she goes into the purest and incorruptible ends. And unless there is a mist, you have accomplished nothing in this work and art, so wash it off with white, because the whitening is the beginning and ferment of the entire perfect work. Which whiteness is not changed into disgusting or various colors, but remains unchanged and unchangeable, and therefore based on the philosophical commandment on such whiteness. The way to act. Make the fermentum comfortable, which is the body before fermentation, so that it is solvated and calcined. This is the body, which is solvated and calcined by the argentum vivum, which is the argentum vivum, which is separated from it and taken away, and is then the purest lime or ash. If you don't make the fermentum right, it counts for nothing. The same applies to the brimstone that does not burn from the lime through the sublimation, that it is bad and alive. Then where you will not mix it into an elixir, the body will not be fermented over which the throwing of the sulfur is to take place. And if you do not cleanse the body that you want it to have been mixed into the elixir, the body will not judge the spirit either, hold much less. And unless you sublimate such a sulfur that you want to bring and send into the elixir, the gold and silver will be very dark. And if you do not purify the spirit, it will not be able to withstand the evil. Then the impure will not be added to the body in the slightest. You must also be careful that you make the elixir a medium between the hard and soft. If you do not know this, the gold and silver will not be able to work, namely for slagging or pouring. Then the medicine must be of a subtler and softer substance than it is, a body and a greater fixation and attitude than the argentum vivum in its nature over which it is thrown. Then Euclid says, our final secret is that we have a medicine that flows from mercurii, but when you want to make the elixir, make a lime of the material that is the body and leave the brimstone in it. As I said above, it is gold. If you take it from the gold, it is silver, then make it from the silver. Then the marriage is no different than that you put the fermentum with his body together from which you want to make the elixir. Then the Tuba says, put these two together, that is the ashes of the perfect body and sulfur, which is white, that is the imperfect one bodies with one another. Therefore the philosopher says, enlighten your body and place it together with the spirit and pure body in equality, that is, with equal weight. Of the weights of the ferments sulfur and mercurii. Remember then you must first know that the sum of the fleeing does not exceed the sum of your cleansed and fixed body, otherwise the bond of marriage was transformed into the flight of the spirit, so is not fixed, and the fleeing brimstone does not exceed the sum of the fixed united with it. That is why Plato says that when a little sulfur is thrown over the majority of the body, so that it has dominion over it, It turns it into dust which will be the same color as the color of the body over which the spirit of gold or silver is thrown, because but the sulfurs cannot bodies enter into existence without the water, namely the mercurii, because the water makes them multiply. Then it is the means to put the tinctures together, which is the sulfur and fermentum. Therefore, in the same disposition or order, you should first put the lime of the body in ferment, and secondly the water, that is the spirit. Thirdly, the air should be put in place, and the soul or sulfur is removed from the body. And so that I need the talk and teaching of the philosopherum, when you first mix the oil in the earth so that the oil in the earth is mortified, then the oil goes into the earth and is devoured by it. But if you first put the water and then the oil will stand and float above the water, or if you first put the water and then the water will be more important than the earth. When you therefore put the elements together, namely the water, and if they were formed in the earth when it became the white elixir, then there should always be more of the earth than of another element. Otherwise the earth would not form the spirit but would escape with it, and this should happen according to reason against the mass of the water. As an example of the lunar elixir, the air is 1 weight and half of the water is 2 weight and the earth is 3 weight, and the ferment of the earth is only 3 times as much as the white sulfur is, when that half the other weight will be of the white sulfur, then 3 weights or pounds should be of the ferment and 2 of the water, so the elixir will be filled. And that's why you should be careful and take note of the composition of the true elixir, and so you should take care, as I said, that you have created knowledge of how much you should add from the earth, how much from the water and how much from the air to the white elixir, and how much of the lesser to the red. Cause is this: when too much of the earth was added to it, then as commanded, the soul dies, but when too little happens, the elixir becomes too moist and not figged. In the same way, when there is too much water, when it is too moist and completely white, when there is too little, it is dry and hard and does not penetrate anything, when there is too little air, it does not produce the perfect color, but when there is too much, so it was brewed in perfection in the white elixir. But as far as the elixir solar is concerned, because the sun is then the moon, 2 pounds of the earth should be 3 pounds of the air, 3 pounds of water, 1 pound and half of the few, then the weight of the few is the average weight of the water, and in there is no addition or reduction to this. Raymundus says, if you want to make the elixir red by describing the common doctrine and teaching, you should take the teaching of making the elixir white as an example. Then the modem method and wise must make the elixir white. One cannot repeat it without only that you put a red element for each elemental white. Then in the elixir to the red the fire is added to make the whole red, and is sublimated like a spirit. But the weight of the elements is 2 pounds of earth and 3 pounds of water, and as much and 1.5 of red sulfur. Then first of all you should put the earth, then it is part of the fermento, secondly the water, then it is the medium between the earth and the air. Thirdly, the luft is the middle between the water and fire. On the 4th day you should place the fire, but the fire is figured through the air like the fire through the earth and sea, as you probably know. One must also know that when the philosophically purified stone is put together with a body and the body is destroyed as it wills and can, the material of the stone always remains with the part of the body that is more purified according to the way of nature. Then the material of the stone forms the fire and cannot be burned. Then this stone is eternally created above all fire. And therefore the more he waits in the place, the more his strength increases in size and shape. Then the philosopherum, her stone has no finite or ceasing moisture, and even though it is dry in experience or to look at, it is still copiosus and riach of fat moisture in its hidden, which moisture can never be destroyed in any way. Then, whenever the body with which it is mixed is destroyed, its substance always remains, subtle or gross after it has been prepared, which is there and is a fixed thing. If the body is not destroyed because of this, the material or medicine remains as it was created and drawn out forever and ever. This is what Giver says. Another philosopher says in the Tubba, all researchers of this art should know that the entire elixir is nothing, it is prepared and refined as it always can, unless after preparation it is put together with the goods and the right fermento. Thank you for the fermento. It should be noted that when the elixir is put together with the bodies, this must happen through the smallest things, as Albertus says. A violent and useful complexion can never happen with solid and whole things where they are not first dissolved in water and then with it are mixed with each other, and that they bond with each other in warm ears through the mixing of the natural verms, or which is similar to them, and this is official through a time that suits them and can happen. Then you have to solve the elixir first, then prepare the corpus and solve like the elixir, but then take it and put the dissolutions or solvations together, namely 3 parts of the elixir and 1 part of the covered bodies. Then you have to congelate the whole thing and then solve and congelate and repeat until the whole thing has become one thing without anything a separation, and this whole is fulfilled by the blessing of our water of mercurii. Then with it the elixir is dissolved and prepared, or prepared. And with it the bodies are dissolved and prepared, then it cleanses, dissolves, makes white and red. Another says, but because the ferment cannot enter the dead body without means and the help of the water, which makes the marriage and copulum or binds between the ferment and the white earth, therefore, in every fermentation of every weight should first be noted, if you therefore want to ferment the white flaky earth into the white elixir, that it will stand in the complement and filling of the tincture over the body from perfection, then 3 parts of the whitened or flaky earth of the dead body and of the water of life, like that you keep 2 parts and the ferment the other half part. But the ferment should be prepared so that it becomes a white lime quickly and subtly when your opinion is on the white dish. But if you want to have the red, then the lime should be as completely citron as the gold prepared, and there will be no other ferment. The cause is then the same 2 bodies being bright and shining, in which there are shining tinging rays, in which they naturally surpass the other bodies with the white and red and take precedence over them. Afterwards you shall put it white in its phylum which was made for it, and in its tempered leather, that they were coagulated and fixed, and a corpus. Then dissolve it again with the 3rd part of the water and make it thin and dry, and repeat this until you open it, until you make the most excellent white stone white and permanent through this degree of repetition and preparation, which goes through the smallest of the bodies and opens it up the swiftest of the rivers, like the fixed water that flows over the fire's battle, tints the mercury and all bodies of diminished perfection in real silver. And notice that the more the order of this fulfillment is repeated, namely solution, coagulation and trituration, the more and more this greater superfluity, namely the goodness of medicine, increases. Then as often as you will act on this stone with its own reserved goodness, you will often become overgrown in the throwing over the bodies that are diminished by perfection. That's why the philosophers praise the repetition very much. If you want to ferment the white earth into the red elixir, then divide the white earth into 2 parts, the 1 part should increase into the white elixir with its white retained water, and so it never ceases to be, and put the other part in his glass, which is in the furnace of his corruption, and multiply it by the force and power of the corruption, which is turned into the reddest stone of all, like a dry and burnt saffron. But if you want it to be a tincture of the red that transforms the whitest elixir and brings it into a different form and tinges the mercurium, lunam and all bodies into the most real sun, or into a sun body, then ferment its 3 parts prepared with the other half part of the purest gold, that it is the subtlest lime, with 2 parts of the distilled water that is artificially brought into a glass, with the combination through the smallest bit to the hidden part of the body, and put it in its glass. In its fire and boil the reddish one. The stone that shines is blood red and strong. You should increase this again from its solitary part, namely with its retained gold water, which you gradually continue through the modum of the dilution of the Sturker fire in the increase of its perfection and accumulation of goodness and repetition of the work from the retained part that is according to its nature. And what is finally confirmed is that his goodness has been increased for all eternity or without end. From the white to make the stone sweet with the moisture. But to make the white of this stone sweet or indulcerable, take the stone and in which you rub it, place it in its container with the moistening through the smallest, namely through the changes that are made there, like the thaw with 1½ parts, then cook with a gentle bite, and first bite it into the substance of the stone will be tsomelated, then make the fire growing from colon leisurely and slowly bite out of it everything that will arise dissolved will be as much from the water of the sulfur as from the moist argento vivo, then bring the sublimated again over the yeast with rubbing and imbibing with the mentioned spirit, which is more in the moisture superfluous and rich. And this is now repeated with daunder imbibition, decoction, congelation and sublimation, with its subsequently nature and which are diligently confirmed, namely with the moderation or moderation of the known feistiness which nature necessarily requires through constant sublimation and repetition of the spirit which does not set fire to them, namely the yeasts, and through constant movement the whole thing underneath them is figged. But when it will be fixed according to the proportion of the fire that is appropriate for it with moderation, make it a strong fire and that is well continued through one natural day the next natural day, but make a stronger fire and the third natural day the strongest. How to water the fire. If you want to incense the stone, take more of the warm and moist thing than you do of the cold and dry one. But if you are bothered by the idea of fixing or fixing, leave more of the cold and dry things than the warm and moist ones. And if the artsnage does not remain completely against the difference, that is and is history due to the lack of fixation, so one should help and overcome the lack either by repeating the solution in congelation or by sublimating the part that is not fixed by a fixed part until it takes calm and compensates against the impetuousness of the fire, experience of fire. And when you realize that it cannot be cast without difficulty, namely due to the lack of insuration, then fill it and make the insuration complete for it with the oil of the stone, in which you drip one drop after the other over a gentle fire in each crucibulo, until it flows like wax without smoke, says Raymundus. Of the multiplication and increase of the stone. First, note what the increase is. Namely the large addition that will occur beforehand. And the increase in form and goodness is as much as solvating and coagulating the tincture, which is imbibing and drying out with our mercurio. Or so, take a part of the prepared tincture and dissolve our mercurii in 3 parts, then put it in a vessel and seal it and put it in warm ashes, as said above, until it all dries out and becomes dust. Then open the glass and immediately dry it again and make it dry as above, and as often as you do this, you will grow some parts and tinge beyond measure, as Arnoldus says. The increase in size is. Take the fig material that is used there, which is 3 parts of the prepared tincture and 1 part of the mercurii philosophorum, put it in a vessel, seal it and put it in warm ashes as above and dry it so that it becomes a dust. Then open the glass and drink again and dry as above. And the water is argentum vivum or mercurium, does not add more weight to the body than much of the metallic moisture remains. This is what Callidius Hydori, son of the same, says about the multiplication in the greater history through the mixing of the medicine in the crucibulo with the argento vivo of the common man. Which argentum vivum is transformed into red or black dust by the addition of the stone, and repeat that of the same dust of the argenti vivi is left over the other argentum vivum and repeat it, it is transformed into dust, and so you should repeat the dust of the argenti vivi over other argentum vivum. The argentum vivum is not transformed into dust but remains transformed into a perfect metal. And such history then the strength of artsnage is tempered with the addition argenti vivi. Likewise, the multiplication of the tincture is nothing other than an increase and multiplication of the natural verm, which there is a sulfur that does not burn in the materia of the argenti vivi, because it is certain that the argentum vivum is the materia of the metals in the substance in which its clarity is captured. Impressed then, the metals do not require anything but a substantial nature, and the substantia in which the tincture of sulfur is incorporated must be from the materia that has been retained before all separation and lack of the entire casting, dear and pleasant to all metals. And that is why it is necessary that the sulfur tincture follow such a substance and is read or bound together in it whenever you want it to be a tincture of metals, and the coated substance should be such that it could be fixed without the consumption of its moisture and without their return to the earth and without the burning of its own substance, and this whole is argentum vivum. That is why it is said, that it is the cause of the perfection to the necessity of the metals. Then it is sufficient for every degree of all castings with the moisture, as can be seen in lead and tin and the like, through good attachment of its parts and through the strength of its noble mixing, speaks Raymundus. The white as well as the red and white artsnage are multiplied in strength and violence. When you have performed the applied medicines and made use of them, you can artificially multiply and increase their virtues in 2 different ways. The first mode or way is, dissolve them in the water of their red or white mercurii from which they are made until the water becomes clear and clear. After this congelate with a mild decoction, and with their oils you should insere in them, but over the fire they flow. Their certain strength will be duplicated in the tincture with all its perfections, as you will see in the rejection. Then the weight or pound that was thrown over 1,000 will then be thrown over 2,000. And in the same increase there is no great or difficult work. The other mode of increasing their strength is a little more difficult when you separate each species of them separately and separate the elements in their water through the humidification and then through the distillation, in which you take the first water and then the air, and it becomes its substance. The earth remains fixed completely clearly in the form of the dust. Bring it back into the same water through the distillation until it is completely drunk and completely fixed in the earth, and then imbibe the whole thing with its oil and its tincture until it is completely fixed and completely fixed. Pour lesset like wax, and of the same medicine throw a weight or pound over the body that you want to transform, and you will certainly find its tincture multiplied by 100 parts to such weight. Again, medicine is increased in two different ways, through the solution of the body or the solution of thinness. Through the solution of the heat you take the medicine placed in a glass vessel and bury it in our moist water for 7 days or longer until the medicine is dissolved in water without clouding. Through the solution of the thinness, which you take the glass vessel with arsenic, and it will be opened into a new honorable harbor, which hole will be left, in which the water boils, and the hole at the harbor will be closed, so that in addition to the vapor of the boiling water the arsenic will be solved by the rising vapor. Please note, however, that this boiling water should not stir the glass vessel in which the medicine is in the space of 3 fingers. And the solution is passed without danger in 2 or 3 days after the medicine has been dissolved. So take it from the fire so that it becomes cold and fixed and songulated, and you prepare it and dry it, and so it should be dissolved openly, and the more it becomes the more resolved it is, the more perfect it is. And such a solution is the subtilization of arsenic and its powerful sublimation. The more it is repeated, the more abundant and often it is tinged. Therefore Rhasis says, the goodness of this multiplication does not depend nor arises in the multiplication and increase of repetition with the sublimation and fixation of the perfect medicine. Then the more the order of this fulfillment is repeated, the more its excess fluid chokes and multiplies. Then as often as you sublimate the medicine beyond its usual measure and cheapness, and as often as you solve it, you will in all circumstances become capable of weighing more than 1,000. And when it will first fall over 1,000, it will fall over 10,000 times, thirdly over 100,000, fourthly over 1,000 times 1,000, and so on without end. Then Maureenus the philosopher says, consider it certain that the more our stone is dissolved and songulated, the more the spirit and soul are joined together and held by them, and with each change the tincture is increased. On another white note, the medicine is increased through fermentation, and if the fermentum is for the white pure moon and a fermentum for the red pure sun, therefore if you throw 1 part of the medicine over 2 parts of the ferment, it will be a medicine entirely, and you put it in a glass vessel over the wall, and will be kept so that the air does not go in or out, and will be kept and governed and subtly made as openly as you want from the first medicine. Such power will be adopted by a part of the other medicine. Then so can the medicine can be increased infinitely through the solution and fermentation. The philosophical stone is multiplied 3 times. In the first white history, through the repetition of the known corruption at the beginning, that is, the stone is corrupted by the dissolution and putrefaction, and the combination of the elements and moistening in the air or earth. And through the decoctions of the air and the common fires. And such to the other common particular works through the combination of the elements with the leached earth and decoction of the common few in the moistening of the dung of the same. Every increase is history at the same time when you will move to the 2 years in addition to the increased medicine in size mentioned speakers, and do as has been said. Then how much the medicine passes through these 2 speakers to the end of the limit or ending, the more it increases in strength because of the material through which it is brought to such subtlety, hence the spirit, and its equality arises from such material as the summit of magnificence is there in the eye of the basilisk, which also increases its equality in the light as it is in the animals, for which reasons the natural beauty of every animal is extinguished as the light of the light is extinguished by the light of the suns. Will be like this, says Raymundus. The way and manner of throwing everything that is prescribed can therefore be researched. Take a part of the medicine and a part of the raw, purified mercurius, so that the mercurius becomes warm to the point of smoke during the fire. Then the artsnage is thrown on it, which immediately flows, in which the smallest ones are penetrated by it. When then the growing fire is placed, one collects the cast mercurium together, one takes a little of it, and as much of its living mercurii is put into the fire, and that is how it will be tried weight. When the added mercurius deviates so that one notices it, the medicine is not sufficient for the other parts. But if the corpus in the body is not noticeably reduced, but the material can still be broken and is even too white or hard, then you take a little bit of the raw mercurio again and go through all the procedures as I said has what you want. From the throwing of artsnage so increased in strength. Take a part or two, a lot, an ounce, of the mentioned increased medicine in the strength, and throw over 100 part of the mercurii, then the mercurius will soon begin to warm up with the mentioned in the crucibulo, and completely coagulated and quickly completely into a fixed medicine to make a rejection about another mercurium. Then take an ounce, and from the other artsnage, and make a throw over 100 part of the other warm mercurii, so that the whole thing will be even louder and a real artsnage. Then you have increased your first artsnage in size, or the whole, or in part you can multiply again through dissolution, and congelation, and moistening. Then in the way that I have said and shown in multiplication, you can increase in strength without end, and then in size throw in the medicine so finely coagulated, a pound, pondus, over 100 of the washed mercurii with salt and vinegar, and make it soon. It will be warm over the fire when you are sure it is smoking, and it will be coagulated into gold. But the oil that comes with the tincture is transformed into a tinging dust on this white. You take a part of the prepared oil and pour it over a part of the raw mercurius, you put it to be digested, and soon the oil turns into such a mercurium that you can't see it, but the mercurius becomes white or raw after the medicine has been prepared to white or red dusty, and which you can trade in the rige without any damage, which you can also throw as you always point out about the mercurii, then always well washed with vinegar and salt. About the power, flavor and nobleness of this laudable whiteness or philosophical tincture. It is well worth knowing that the old whites found 4 great effects and virtues in this glorious treasury of comforting, helpful whiteness. Firstly, it is said that it removes and heals the human body from many weaknesses. On the other hand, that it renews imperfect metallic bodies. Thirdly, that she transforms base and despised common stones into many delicious kleinot. Fourthly, that she makes all the glasses so that you can pull and jam them. Of the first, all philosophers have agreed that when the bloodstone is made completely red, it will not only work miracles in the entire body but also in the human body, of which there is no doubt. Then it is called all weakness from the inside out. From the outside it is said to be with smearing. Then the philosophers say when one gives it in water or warm wine to the gouty dropsy lepers, this is what they call it. Other people say that when you smear it a lot of roses comes out. Therefore, the stinging in the cardiac passion, intestinal gout, colica, jaundice, ictericia, morbus aegidii, the falling addiction or sick day epilepsia, morbus comitialis, and all species of the feathers are secreted through them when one ingests. The rigidity of the limbs, artetica, is through it is holy when you smear yourself, and what is in a sick stomach, it takes it away and holds you together and consumes all the rivers of evil moisture. When you drink it or smear it, and when you sip it sober, it drives away melancholy and all the sadness of toil from all kidneys, rheumaticum fluxum, dries them out. It is the best healer and also a cure for evil eyes. Then it heals the flow of the animals, reduces the watering of the eyes, drives away the redness and whitens the fur or coat, in which it erases the stinging white in the eyes, horn or complaint, sniffing, resistance of the eyebrows, heat and darkness, building of the eyes, all of which become quite light, secreted and cured by the philosophical artsnage. When you drink it, it strengthens the heart and airways, spiritualia. When the slacker is smeared with it, it relieves the weight of the head. It also makes the deaf hear and compensates for all the weight of the ears and bloated or swollen limbs. The eaten teeth make it good again, washed with it makes the stinking breath good, sweet and pleasant. They also cause all the headaches and shivering when you smear them or put plasters on them or put dry dust on them. The severe wounds, the cancer fistula nali metanhair, the burning revenge scales of the in view of the grinding heat of the limbs, pruritus, and mats which are thereby secreted the scars are immediately thereby also new flesh grows when the spoiled and sawn wine is mixed with it against fresh the tearing stone is solved when you drink it, it expels the poison when you drink it, the worms are also killed when you turn them into powder. The hair under the braid is removed when you smear it, all the wrinkles and spots are removed from the face, when you smear it it makes the face young and beautiful. When women need it, in times of childbirth, it helps with childbirth, it removes the dead fruit, and when it is smeared on plaster, it causes urine or causes urination. Increases and excites the coitum, prevents pressure, makes a good memory, increases the humidum radical, vigorat naturam strengthens and freshens nature and gives many other benefits to the human body. Then this medicine is above all medicines Hippocrates, Galen, Alexander, Constantini, Avicenna and all other doctors of medicine, it is more delicious and excellent in smell, taste, power and effect. And it is worth noting that this medicine should always be mixed with the apothecary medicine so that people can get rid of illnesses the better. From the other it is written that it transforms all imperfect metals, then this transformation is evident enough. Then everything that is silver makes it gold in color substance which creates weights generation melting strength and softness. From the third it is written that it transforms stones into precious gems as stated above in the book Sextarii where it is said that the jaspin hyacinthan white and precious stone is gold-colored sapphires from this material can be formed and made. And in the Carta Sacerdotum it is taught that through them, in addition to the crystal, a carfuncicle or ruby or topaz can become, the color and substance of the natural ones surpass these stones and others for which this medicine will be. It gives a natural strength with its nobleness but so that the natural colors are mixed into them then they are melted and softens all the stones and precious little things. So it is written by the verse that it makes a glass that you can inhibit it when you mix it with it when it melts then this medicine can be brought into all colors but the other experiences allow the artist to be a little more diligent. Raymundus says that the named artsnage also has the power to rectify every animal and make all the branches alive in the time of spring through its large and wonderful verm then when you roughly dissolve 1 millet grain from it in water and put it into the core of a vine in the size of a hazelnut, artificial leaves and flowers and good branches will grow in the month of May, and do the same with every branch shoot. Then it will be considered a miracle and against the course of nature for the sake of such things those who consider it to be allowed to do so do not know the power of such a thing, but there is nothing else than a pure natural thing that is cast in its humido radicale, and because nature, through its incentive, desires to be much, it works more towards this of every element in which it multiplies the natural verm of the body in the center in which it has passed. That is why it has the power to rectify everyone and the same power to act in them. And that is the tried and tested medicine of the philosopherum which God our Lord Jesus Christ examines faithfully for everyone and who seeks it apart from God and wants to give and bestow it for his benefit, who lives with the Father and the Holy Spirit and one God reigns for all eternity. Amen. The End.